This is something that I've been wanting to do for a while now, which is basically a podcast style review for one of my favorite TV shows. So before you watch this video, I really recommend you watch the show because we're going to be spoiling the whole thing, and it's a really fun show that I don't want you guys to miss out on. You can find links for how to watch the show in the video description, and if you're curious on what this show is, I also just put out a video where I break down the show, why I love it so much, why it's so exciting, and all of those things. But it is originally a Korean show. We're going to be taking a look at the Netherlands season, which is just premiering now. And it is a reality competition elimination show. Think like Survivor or Big Brother, but every round the players are going to be introduced to a new kind of social deduction game, and one player is going to get eliminated each episode. It is a ton of fun, so I really wanted to share it with you guys, and you can get on the ground floor right now. Episode 1 has just premiered, and yeah, I think everybody should watch it. So we're going to be going over everything in this episode, as you can tell by the length of this video. We're going to be going in on super detail with myself and my co-host Gemini, who won't appear on screen. They were having some crazy camera issues, so the screen will mostly just be this, and I'll also throw in some additional footage to spice some things up as the episode goes on. One other thing I do want to mention, as you can hear it creeping back in now, I am just finally getting over being sick. So, we'll have to put up with that for the first episode of the podcast, but that should be taken care of by next week. And hopefully you guys enjoy, and hopefully you guys also enjoy The Genius, The Netherlands. It's a ton of fun. I know that we really enjoyed it, and here's 3 hours of us talking about it. What is up, everybody? I'm NoLucksGiven, and today I am here joined by my friend Gemini to talk about The Genius, The Netherlands, Episode 1. So, we are both really big fans of The Genius, originally a Korean reality TV game show, and we wanted to get together and talk about it, share our thoughts with you guys.
Yeah, hi, I'm Gemini. I am a huge fan of The Genius, as NoLux happened to say, and I'm really excited to get to talking about this episode. There's a lot of thoughts that came out of this relatively short episode, considering the original length of The Genius from the Korean show.
It's a lot shorter, and I think that's going to be part of our job, is to make these episodes longer for everybody, because we're going to have a lot of words to say. The episode kicks off starting with introductions of all of the characters, but before that, it talks about special talents, and this is borrowed from the Korean season as well, saying that everybody in life has special talents that makes them a genius in their own right. And I thought this was a good place to start for us on the podcast. We are introducing Gemini to the channel. So, Gemini, what makes you a genius, and what are some of the special talents that you bring to the table?
Oh, that's a tough one. But I think one thing that I have that's really good. So I am someone who has been part of the community for a while and has played some online versions of the game. And the things that I really excel at on there is, I think one of my greatest talents is that I'm really good at quickly establishing a working connection with other people, having people feel like I'm their friend and I can work with them. And I think that in a show like The Genius, that's a really important thing to have.
Very cool.
And
yeah, I think that social aspect is definitely super important, as we see that play out a number of times throughout this first episode. So you definitely would have had a good handle on that. So the show starts off, we meet our 10 competitors, and we've got a few interesting personalities. I don't think we're going to dive into those too much at the start. We'll just kind of learn about those as they are introduced throughout the episode. We do see some gamers, that's fun, a YouTuber as well, and a writer. And we also see one thing that I really liked is a 5-5 split of men and women, which doesn't sound like a huge thing, but coming from the Korean Genius, I think that's like a 3-10 split half the time, with a very male-dominated field. So that was really cool to see, just right off the bat. I didn't know anything about any of the cast members going into this. I'm assuming same thing for you?
Yeah, I didn't either, but I was super excited when the cast came out and it was an equal number of men and women.
Yeah.
Just because, as you said, the Korean version is very male dominated. I think the best ratio it ever had was 8 men to 5 women, which is still like not the greatest.
Yeah.
And like, as we will see later in the episode, this is the first time in the Genius history of like an actual TV show that the women have outnumbered the men.
Yeah, very true. Yeah, with a male elimination. Spoilers. Obviously, there's going to be spoilers for the episode. If you have not already watched it, you can find a link for that in the video description and follow along with us there. Watch it and then come back. Watch all of the Korean episodes as well, and then come back and watch this one. So we are going to be talking a lot about the Korean episodes as well. This episode is almost like a direct copy of the opening episode from season 2 of the Korean Genius. So there's definitely going to be some spoiler talk in here. If you haven't watched those yet, kind of just inevitable. But we want to be able to reference some of those old things because it's like when we want to talk about this game, for instance, it's impossible for us to talk about our thoughts on this game without mentioning that we've already seen it before. So we already have some preconceived notions going into it. But it does look like the format is going to be pretty similar to the Korean version of the Genius. Maybe some changes, but we're going to have a main match with winners and losers, and then we're going to have a death match where someone is eliminated each episode.
Yeah, and that's essentially the crux of the Genius. That's why what we're watching is still the Genius, despite it being significantly shorter, smaller cast, less episodes. It has everything at the crux. The one thing that I found interesting about this first episode, relating back to the Korean version, is garnets, which I believe in this version are being called G coins, but were also never really addressed in this first episode at all. But if you look, you can see that on all of their badges, they have the number of how many they have, because we see, for example, and once, as you already said, spoilers for the rest of the episode. From this point on, it's getting very spoiled.
I spoiled it before I even said spoiler warning, so apologies for that. But it's going to be, we're talking about the episode, so there you go.
But we see, like, in the deathmatch, Thomas's badge suddenly goes and has a 3 on it all of a sudden.
Good catch, good catch.
Yeah, so even though it's not addressed, it's clear that they're part of the show, and I am curious to see moving forward how that affects it.
Yeah, I have to imagine that for episode 1, there was so much that they needed to cram into these 45 or so minutes that they said, we'll deal with garnets or G-coins or whatever we're going to call them in episode 2. And those are basically a game piece that is something that you get to take with you throughout the different games for those still unfamiliar with the format. But that's definitely making a return. Maybe a little bit difference in some of how the show is structured. I think we'll maybe talk about more of that at the end of the episode, just so that way we can get into the meat and potatoes here. But yeah, it's the Genius, and we like the Genius, so we're excited to see how this is gonna go. So let's get on to the first game. We've got main match 1, Eat or Be Eaten. And as I said, we both have seen this game before. Not quite exactly the same. because we saw this game originally in Season 2, Episode 1 of the Korean version of the show, played with 13 cast members. And in this episode, it's only going to be played with 10, which means 3 less roles. There's also 1 less location. But I guess not to complicate it, let's not bring up some of those extra things that we didn't see. Let's talk more about what we did see, I guess. And I think the first thing is that we hear the players express. We hear this from Rick, who winds up being the eagle. It's very tough to lose as the lion, is the first thing that we get from Rick. And obviously that's funny, knowing that in the Korean version of the show, the lion is the player that loses and ultimately gets eliminated from the episode. So my first thought was definitely not that it's good to be the lion upon seeing Eat or Be Eaten.
Yes, obviously I didn't think so either, but of course we come in with a different knowledge. For people who had never seen it before, if I was going in blind, I absolutely think that my first instinct would be whoever is the most powerful role, the role with the most ability to like affect others and just eat anyone. It seems like a role that should on paper be the most powerful and be one that you can very easily win with. As we see, it does still require quite a bit of strategy and planning to navigate the big pitfall the lion has of needing to eat every round.
Yes, and I think one of the things that we can do right now, and one of the ways that I think this podcast could be fun, we've both played a lot of these games, so I think it'd be fun to discuss what we would do if we were playing this game. And for this one, it's a little bit tricky because we don't know what roles we would get. So we kind of have to discuss how we would go about playing each of these 10 different roles. I mean, maybe they're not all exactly unique, but at least go over the big hits of how we think the players should approach these different roles when we first take a look at this game.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. What do you want to start with?
I'd say let's start with the lion, since that's what we've already been talking about. And the big thing, I haven't done all of the math, but one thing, and again, to hold myself honest, this is something that is revealed in the Korean version of the show. One of the tricks to this game is that the lion's enemies aren't necessarily the otter, the duck, the deer. The lion actually has to eat the other prey animals if they want to win the game.
Yeah, you mean predators, right?
I'm sorry,
yes.
The other predators, yeah.
No, I completely agree because, this is a situation where, as we see, you can't eat the snake.
Right.
And you can't eat whichever one of the duck, otter, or deer is left alive after the other two are eaten, which means that realistically, there's only 5 prey that can be eaten. And with 2 other predators trying to eat, that number shrinks so quickly. So you have to essentially protect as many prey as you possibly can in the early stages of the game, so that by the late stages, you're not stuck in a situation where you just don't have the numbers left to eat anymore.
Right, yeah, and that's definitely huge. Again, I don't know if I would have, because I don't believe that when I saw the Korean version of the show, that immediately clicked for me. Obviously, watching it like this second time, I was like, oh, that lion needs to eat the crocodile right now. Different stuff like that we'll get to. But that's definitely the first thing that I think about with the lion. In terms of what else you'd want to do, I mean, there is, I don't know, any other thoughts on how you'd want to play as the lion?
The only other sort of thing is, as a bit of protection, you would want to especially protect the water rat, because that's the one that wins if you win. So if you can find the water rat quickly and have them just sort of travel with you being ready to strike at anyone who looks like they're about to strike at your water rat.
Yeah.
Yeah, because if you can save the water rat, then that's essentially a meal that should be a free ride for you because a water rat has it in their best interest to help you survive.
Right. It's like save the water rat, and then if somebody does eat the water rat, you just eat them, and
Yeah.
that's
Yeah,
your
and
meal.
yeah, and they
Exactly.
reveal themselves to you. So that's a way where if other predators are very hesitant to reveal themselves, that is a way to sort of get them to.
Yeah. And we could say similar things. I think let's work our way down the food chain. We'll talk about the crocodile. Very similar, though can skip one round of eating and still has a partner in that Egyptian plover that they can eat. That's their water rat.
Yeah. Yeah. I think though the croc is definitely a little different with the main one being it wants to eat the eagle right away because similar mentality to the lion, the fewer predators on the board, the better. So the croc would definitely want to as quickly as possible eat the eagle. The one thing that makes the croc a little almost trickier than the lion is the fact that the plover's home area is the sky, which the
Right.
crocodile can't go to.
Right.
So while the lion and water rat can travel back and forth between the land and the water every other round together,
Yeah.
the crocodile has to spend essentially 2 rounds without the plover there as a potential meal.
Yeah. It seems like a very tough character to play. All of these, I mean, they all seem tough. That's part of the fun of it. It well, except for one of them. One of these characters specifically does not seem very tough to play. Maybe
No,
that's just
we'll get
in
there.
the way that the games have played out. But yeah, Croc. Yeah, that's a great point. And then we can bring up the eagle as well.
Yeah, Eagles. I'm going to say it. I think the eagle might be the second toughest role to play out of
Wow.
all of these.
Okay.
Only because the eagle has a very difficult position where it has to be in the sky for 2 rounds,
Right.
which means that at least one of those rounds, it has to have one of the only 2 sky prey animals in that place for it
Right.
to eat. And then it can go the other sky round without eating. But as we see with like Rick, if you get unlucky in like a round where you're out of the sky and are unable to eat, then you have to have both of those sky prey essentially available for you
Yeah.
in the 2 rounds that you have to go to the sky.
And there's a
So
lot
that's
of there's a
yeah.
lot of mind games that can happen if players are playing a little bit more optimally and you get into a place where say the let's say the duck and the eagle are alive and there's 2 rounds left. The duck and the eagle can go to they're going to have to go to the sky either in round 3 or round 4, so it becomes the eagle's job to predict when the duck will go to the sky, but the duck also has to play around the other predators, so it's not
Yeah,
quite
it's
super safe for the other sky creatures. Like
yeah.
they're probably gonna go to the sky, but then yeah, just it's all in the mind games there.
Yeah, so that's just sort of why I feel like of the 3 predators, the eagle is probably the toughest to play in my opinion. They all have their difficulties though. Like they definitely all have
For
their
sure.
difficulties.
One thing, well, sorry, I'm gonna have to grab some water here.
All good.
One thing, while we are discussing strategy and tactics, I went back last night and I watched that season 2, episode 1 of the Korean show, just to kind of see how some of those players had approached it at the time. And one thing that those players did was they formed groups, they formed alliances before the game even started, before they knew each other's roles, and before they knew their own roles. And one of the big things that allowed them to do, say you have even a group of 4, but just for simplicity's sake, we'll say it's a group of 5. The 5 of you each peeks at one of the other 5 remaining members, and then together you have all of the information. And that wasn't something that we really got too much into when we looked at this episode in terms of who peeked at who and then who shared information with who. That some of that information comes back later and is revealed through like flashback sequences. But yeah, there was I think that's kind of an interesting way to approach the game as well, in terms of being able to control information and which characters does that really benefit. I mean, information's always good, right?
Yeah. There was definitely sort of a lack of quick forming alliances in there. I think the only real connections we see at like the very start of the game are that we see Jasper and Rick talk quickly about their roles, and we see and like sort of seem to have a loose agreement. And then we also see after the fact, once we get into the first round, one of the trio of the deer, duck, and otter, I can't remember exactly which one, but one of them talks about how the 3 of them did come together and agree to go to the same location in the first round to protect themselves. So we see little glimpses of it, but we definitely don't see a lot. And I think, I think a big part of it is that it doesn't feel like, at least from the way the show presents itself, it doesn't feel like they had much time in between getting the rules
right
and going right into peeking and then playing the game. Like, it feels like a pretty quick, let's get right into it, which didn't, I think, give a lot of players the time to really think about an optimal strategy. And I think that severely harms, in particular, the 3 predators. I think the 3 predators not having time to plan things out a little bit and get it into their mind that, oh, we actually might have to be conscious about the prey, absolutely hurts their chances. And I think it really hurts, in particular, it really helps the snake. And then, as we sort of see, the trio, or one of the trio.
One of them, yeah. So, one thing that I also noticed that was interesting in the Korean version of the show is they actually play the game twice. They play the game once as sort of a practice round. They give everyone their own role, they run through the game, and they tell everybody it's just for practice, and they play the game to completion. And then they give everybody all of the roles and play it for real this time. And that certainly would have helped, I think, all of the players feel a little bit more familiar. It's also definitely fun to keep the players on their toes and not have them exactly know what's happening. I think that some of the really fun moments from this as a television program also come from some of those big mistakes, but we didn't necessarily get to see any huge major tactical plays by any of the players because of, I think, both of us feel maybe a little bit of a concession to the speed of the format and maybe the producers wanting to keep the players on their toes. They were just on their toes a little too much there.
Yeah. I mean, so I have seen some things that have been, or heard some things that have been said by Anna Maja, one of the contestants. I don't know if I pronounced her name correctly.
Okay, yeah, we'll probably get some pronunciations wrong on this podcast as well. That's the chess player, right? The female chess player and streamer?
He is the chess player and streamer. And yes, on one of her streams, she talked about some of the behind the scenes things from this episode. And she talked about how the show specifically brought everyone in claiming that the show had a different name. I can't remember what the name is at the moment, but said it had a different name and distinctly did not want them watching the
Right.
genius or knowing
Right.
anything about the genius. They wanted these players coming in blind. So it is definitely possible that that same mindset then carried over into throwing them into the game relatively blind.
Right.
But I do think in that instance, it did hurt them a little bit, because I feel even just a round of practice and then going into it would help people at least understand the mechanics of, like, okay, this is how you kill, this is how you sort of peek,
Right.
this is some rules that might be able to work together.
Yeah.
Just from like one round of getting a bit of a feel for things. Yeah.
One thing, and I mean, again, it's all kind of a crapshoot. It's trying to predict the other players at the end of the day. But any thoughts in terms of, and we'll just stick to in terms of those 3 predators starting in your home location versus starting at an away field. Any thoughts there?
I think for the lion and crocodile, it's slightly less important. I think it probably doesn't hurt to do so, but it's not the most important. I think for the eagle, it is probably in your best interest to start in the sky, because that knocks off one of your sky rounds. And if any other birds had the same idea of going to the sky, then that gets you a meal in the first round, as opposed to what we see in the episode where he doesn't do that and loses out on a meal due to circumstances, obviously.
Right.
But at least
right.
that way, if you don't get a meal, then you know you don't have a meal, and that's one less sort of sky round. And as I sort of explained before, I think that the sky rounds for the eagle are the scariest ones.
And if you don't get a meal, you're either going to get a meal the next round, or the lion and the croc ate both of your birds, in which case you were probably going to lose anyways.
Yeah, if they ate both of the birds in the first round and you were in the sky, then you wouldn't get a meal, and there would be another round where there would be no birds to eat. So you've already lost if that's the case.
Right, exactly.
So in that instance, I definitely think it's in your best interest, because if no birds show up, then you just stay in the sky another round and you got yourself a meal.
Let's talk about the real alpha predator next. The best role in the game. I think it. Yeah, let's get this one out of the way. Now I'm nervous. I'm going to say the wrong one, but the snake. The snake is extremely, extremely powerful in this game, to the point where, and I'm not trying to be too critical, but Thomas didn't do anything and winds up winning this game. That's basically how powerful the snake is.
I completely agree. I think that so now we're getting into a few of like the little negative things of this episode, but I want to say, from a storytelling perspective, I think one of the biggest hurts on this episode in the main match is that, and this is just a sort of a problem with the game in general and how it makes it a bit difficult to storytell, is all of your active roles, all of your roles that are out doing things are your predators. And as we've sort of talked about, if your predators aren't playing optimally, then it's not the most likely that they win. And so because of that, we get 2 roles in the snake and the otter who kind of don't play much role in what actually happens in the game, and are just kind of there, that end up being the 2 survivors at the end, due to the fact that neither one can be killed and so many people are dead.
I will defend the otter a little bit. His name is it Fabian? I think that he had some subtle stuff that we'll talk about, I guess, as we go through the episode and break it down. But certainly, the snake, I guess. I haven't thought about this too much, but what is the scenario where the snake loses the game? How can the snake lose?
I think, in my opinion, sort of the only scenario in which the snake loses is if a player like the lion immediately is with the other predators and eats them right away. Just gets them out of the way. If the lion plays optimally and gets lucky, then that is definitely a situation where there's likely to be enough prey left behind at the end that there'll be 4 or more living players. But I do think that sort of if that doesn't happen, and that can still not happen if the lion then like starves to death, but like if the lion is eating prey and the crocodile's eating prey and the eagle's eating prey, I don't see any scenario in which 4 or more people survive in the end.
Even in a scenario where the lion eats the other predators, if we talk like how we talked about earlier, where the crocodile eats the river mouse, and then the lion immediately eats the crocodile, that's still 2 of them gone, you know? Like, there's going to be a lot of scenarios, even with a lion playing optimally, where 7 players still wind up dead before the end of the game. One thing that I think is interesting about the snake is one of the ways that the snake can lose is if they are tricky and are a snake. Because if one of the, like, let's say the predators accidentally eat the snake and die, then that's a lot less players dying for the snake. So the snake is actually incentivized to not be a snake and actually just tell the truth, which should be a little bit more complicated with the chameleon in play, but still, like, the snake really has no incentive to lie, except in some like very small edge case scenarios. So I do understand keeping it close to the vest, but one of the worst things happening for you as the snake is like getting attacked round 1 because somebody doesn't know you're the snake.
Yes. Yeah, no, I definitely, I agree. And yeah, it is definitely ironic in that sense. Yeah, but like in theory, and we can talk about the chameleon just briefly after this, but in theory, claiming you're the snake should be a red flag that you're the chameleon and actually cause you more problems.
Right.
But because of the circumstances surrounding the chameleon in this game, I think that just openly saying that you're the snake in round 1 would have been the optimal play for Thomas. Yeah. But even so, as long as you're not like actively trying to convince other people to attack you, just sort of taking a back seat and saying, well, I'm just going to be here, is not the worst strategy in the world.
And again, all of that is going to get into those same mind games of, are people lying? Are they telling the truth? Are they telling the truth to make me think that they're lying about lying, etc.? And those recursive rabbit holes. Is there a rabbit on here? No, we don't have a rabbit. So as I brought up rabbit holes, I thought that would have been a nice transition. But maybe let's transition into the rabbit-like animals. We've got the deer, the otter, and the duck, that trio. They were able to find each other relatively quickly. I do wonder... Okay, so for any of these characters, you get your role. Are any of these a role where before the game even starts, you're sitting around the table with the other players, you just raise your hand and you say, this is what I am, and you just publicly role claim?
I don't think publicly to everyone claiming your role is the best strategy, but if you can find a predator or 2 who you want to work with and who you feel like would want to work with you. And obviously this requires you to have an understanding of the way the role works and how when only 1 remains, that remaining 1 player is immune and cannot lose. If you have that understanding, then if you can find a predator or 2 and essentially get them, like, try and rat out the other 2, try and get them to eat the other 2 to make you the 1 remaining player. Yeah. I feel like that's the best strategy you can have in this game.
For sure.
As one of those roles. I think the only one of the 3 roles whose strategy can be slightly different is the duck.
Right.
Only because if the duck's goal should be, in my opinion, to get the eagle out. Because once the eagle is gone, the duck can just spend the rest of the game in the sky and be in no danger anymore.
Yep.
But for the other two roles, and even still for the duck, getting the other two roles killed as quickly as possible is probably the best strategy, which once again is a bit ironic because on paper you'd look at this and you'd say,
Yeah.
oh, I want to work with these people. We should get into the same room so we're safe. When in actuality, you want to sell the other players out and get yourself to that one remaining person from the trio as quickly as possible.
It's a great point. I called it the trio. I have it as the trio in our notes here, and that's how I viewed it going into the episode, watching the episode. I'm going to admit I was probably hoodwinked when I watched the Korean version of the show 2 years ago, and they got me again when I watched the episode this week. I totally forgot that once those other players... Excuse me, I'm still getting over being sick a little bit, by the way. My viewers know what I'm talking about. I'm mostly better, but as I'm talking for a little bit here, some of that congestion's coming back up. They seem like these are characters that are supposed to work together, and that's what the players think as well. But of course, they're actually enemies. They kind of want to compete against each other for the ability to win the game, because one of them is going to be able to survive when the other two are dead. And figuring that out is definitely an interesting aspect to how the game plays out. But yeah, maybe with that in mind, as the deer, duck, or otter, maybe you're not actually in the best position to raise your hand and say, I'm the deer, because you're not actually trying to find those other two allies, trying to find those other two enemies and people that are going to stop you from winning. So that's a great point to bring up, that maybe some of the other players, like who does the lion have to be afraid of? Nobody. And it might benefit the lion, or I would think it could benefit the lion to say, I'm the lion. Then the water mouse can come to you, and that can make some aspects of the game a little bit easier. But maybe not as one of the members of the trio, the safety trio there.
Yeah, as you said, I think that the snake and the lion are the only two where I would recommend saying your role publicly to everyone. There are other ones where I think sharing your role in a one-on-one setting to like build trust and try and work with people can be incredibly helpful. But to have it out in the open for everyone to know, the snake and the lion are really the only two who that has no major chance of blowing back on. Even with the lion, there's a slight possibility of people wanting to avoid where you're going, but there's only so much they can do at that point. So like, I think that those are two roles where you could stand up, raise your hand, and go, this is my role. This is what well, maybe if you're the lion, probably don't say this is what I plan to do, or people might avoid it.
Yeah. You can't let your actions be known, but you can let your role be known. Exactly. I guess speaking of the lion, we can talk a little bit about the water rat. I think you've mostly touched on what the water rat should do, which is just hop onto the lion and say, I'm going to go with you to each location each round, and just be food for you in case you need it.
Yeah, problem with water rat and plover is that they are roles that directly rely on another role to win. So there's not much they themselves can do other than try and gain information for their predator, and then just try and be in the same place as the predator as often as possible.
Yeah.
That's really it's only two calls.
That's a great point. Maybe the water rat could get some advantage out of raising their hand and saying, I'm the otter, and then being able to try to grab some additional information in that way, or if not, just publicly claiming, doing one-on-one claims to try to just share information a little bit more that way. There is something interesting in games like this. I know that some of our friends in the Genius Discord community have been playing some Blood on the Clock Tower some recently, and one thing that's interesting in that game, which is a game with roles and social deception, it's very similar to Mafia, except everybody gets a role. And one thing that's really fun in that game is going off with another player and swapping role information. But more than just swapping information, you tell each other, okay, I'm the butcher, you're the chef. I'm going to pretend to be the chef. I'm going to tell everybody I'm the chef. You pretend and tell everybody that you're the butcher. And I was kind of thinking, I wonder if any strategies like that could be utilized in a game like this as well.
I think they could. I think one of the big problems behind that, though, is that there's so much peeking that happens before the game even starts. So there is an incredibly high likelihood that if you claim a role that's different from your role, someone else will be able to immediately clock you and say, hold on a second, that doesn't match up with what I've seen.
Right.
So I do think that limits the amount of lying you can do to an extent. If you get lucky, I definitely think it would be in the interest of potentially the one of the roles like the water rat or the plover to try and trade claiming roles with like the otter or the duck. I think that could have interest for both parties because it would help protect the plover or water rat in a situation where they're in a room with a bunch of other prey. Predators would be less likely to even try because they'd assume that they're already protected. And then for the other one, it would allow them to, once again, this is going into the strategy of the other people in the trio are your enemies. It would allow them to essentially target those people without those people thinking to target them. But of course, that only is to your benefit if everyone realizes that they should be targeting each other.
Right. Yeah, that's very interesting with the peeking, especially just to like elaborate on that point. If let's say we're, just for simplicity's sake, the otter and the duck. I'm the otter, you're the duck. You're gonna say you're the otter, I'm gonna say I'm the duck. If somebody peeked at either me or you, then they would know that we're lying. Or in a case where, actually even simpler, let's say I am the water rat and I want to claim the otter, which was the example that I used earlier. Even if I'm not trading with anybody, if I'm just trying to publicly claim that, well, anyone that's peeked at me knows that I'm lying, and anybody that's peeked at the actual otter also knows that I'm lying. So in that, right, with all the peeking, it's very tough to find ways to lie. You just have to try to get lucky.
Yeah, so I think the only situations you can really lie are in those one-on-one situations where the odds that the person you're speaking to has peeked at you or the person you're claiming are significantly smaller.
A little bit
I feel
lower,
like that's the only place where you can comfortably potentially get away with a lie.
And in that regard, this really isn't even like a social deduction game in any aspect, because there is actually so much information, and it's more than 10 peaks that go across, because two of the characters, I want to say it is the simping characters, right?
Yeah, the plover and the water rat.
Yeah.
They just want their beloved to win.
Exactly. So both of those get 2 peaks, so there's actually 12 total peaks going across, so you can know a pretty good deal who a lot of the players are. It does provide some interesting maneuvers, I guess, as both the plover and the water rat, to, if you are able to find the deer or the otter or the duck, find interesting ways to sell them out in hopes that you're the person that you're simping for, your predator, will be able to have a better shot to win with that.
Yeah. And so, I think that getting 2 peaks is sort of necessary for those roles, because it then at least gives them the information that they can then share to their predator, which that's sort of, there's the best thing you can, as I sort of said, you can do in those roles is share as much information as you can. So having 2 peaks allows you to share that information. But of course, that's only if you know it. So for example, if you're the plover and you don't know who the crocodile is, then you're in a situation where you're sitting on this information and you have no clue who to give it to.
So let's move on. We got one last animal to talk about, the chameleon. So the chameleon should pretend to be the snake, right? What?
Yep.
Are there any other things that you can see that aren't that, in terms of a play?
In theory, you could also claim to be the lion, because then no one would like want to get at you. But that facade immediately drops the second you haven't eaten someone in the first round and you're still alive.
Right.
So the snake is easily the role you want to go to, because no one, if people think you're the snake, no one should want to attack you.
Right.
And that's your best chance at surviving till the end. I said earlier that I feel that eagle is the second hardest role to play. I think chameleon is the hardest.
Okay.
Because I think even if you claim snake, it's still very likely that at some point over the 4 rounds you will get attacked or eaten. Like
right.
we even see in the 3rd round, Roxanne the lion attack the snake. Just for the sake of being like, well, I don't want to starve. Like the odds of that just happening to you because you're stuck in a room with someone, they're like, well, there's a small chance you're the chameleon. I'll give it a try.
In
and
that
then they're
case,
right.
we'll get to that. I'm sure. Well, maybe not. We won't have to. But that was a scenario where Roxanne was like, all right, well, I'm either going to die because I starve or I'm going to die because you're the snake. So I might as well just attack you. And yeah, the chameleon doesn't really have as many places to hide. If that's the case. Maybe the chameleon needs to be able to like not go into a room 1 round, which of course immediately reveals what you are. But if you only had to survive 3 rounds or something as the chameleon,
I think a different sort of way to make it just that little bit more powerful would be if you open up the chameleon to be able to go to any location and doesn't have like a home location.
Right. Yeah, that's
that
a
way
fair
you can pretend
too,
stronger to be anyone. Because even though it's in your best interest to claim to be the snake, which is in the land, which is your home location, like even though it's in your best interest to not visit the sky and visit the land every 2 rounds. In the event that you wanted to claim another role to go to the sky, like for example, the plover, like the chameleon did call, that was going to be immediately clocked the second round 2 hit and you aren't in the sky.
Exactly.
So like, I think that opening it up to allow it to just sort of travel wherever would at least free it up a little bit more.
Yeah, and a chameleon can climb trees, right? That's the sky. I think that it works as far as the nature documentary justifications that they put behind it. But
works well enough.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so that is a lot of words about how we might approach this game as people that have played this game a little bit before. Not played this game specifically, but have you played any games that were pretty similar to this one?
Actually, fairly recently, I happened to be in an online game that had a very similar food chain type game. And my role in that game is sort of what I explained the chameleon to be as my improvement, where I was a role that I was bottom of the food chain. I couldn't eat anyone. I had no like special protection, but my one ability was that I had no home location and I could travel to all of the locations. And I'll be honest, at first, I thought it was gonna suck and it was gonna be really tough. But, and this is sort of what I would actually recommend another, like a strategy for the chameleon is that what you have to do is find as quickly as possible, find the predators and just suck up to them. Just promise them, like, you can eat me in later rounds, just don't eat me this early. And then hope to God that in those later rounds, you're not in the same room as them or they've already starved to death.
Yeah. I think
kind of all
that's a
you can
huge
do.
part of the game, is recognizing that these predators are strong and can take you out of the game whenever, and getting on their good side and making them want to be on your good side as well. Yeah, that's definitely a huge aspect. I did play one game that was slightly reminiscent of this. The role that I got was basically the equivalent of one of the roles that was cut for this version, so we don't have to get into too much. I had to make a prediction, and I won based off if my prediction was correct or not. But we didn't see anything like that in this one, so I don't have as direct experience, and that one was a little bit different because it wasn't food chain. The smaller guys could gang up and attack the larger guys. So we wound up taking down the lion as part of our strategy there. But yeah, not exactly as applicable. But yeah, we do have some experience playing some similar games. But let's get on to the TV side of things and talk about how this plays out in the episode. We've already said a bunch of words on the actual game part, which is definitely fun. But there were a lot of fun moments between all of these characters and things too, I think.
Yeah, we've talked about how we would do it. Now let's talk about how it actually went.
Exactly. So the first thing that I notice after the players start reading a little bit more of the roles is we hear Jasper, who will become our crocodile, say, I don't know if the lion is actually at an advantage. And Thomas, who is our snake, chimes in, or the rat. And I thought that this was a very cool moment to kind of show the differences in the levels of tactics between some of the players, because we had Rick, who is our eagle, just say that it's very tough to lose as the lion, to circle back to that a little bit. And then we have Jasper that's like, no, I think the lion's kind of a tough role. And that definitely made me realize that Jasper and Thomas are two players to pay attention to.
Yeah, no, I agree. It definitely, they're showing themselves as players who I feel like at this point in the game probably have some of the stronger grasps on how the game is actually more likely to play out.
Right.
Rather than some players who are still sort of, because of how short it is since they just learned about it, are still at that surface level, being tricked by the way the game's presented until, as we already talked about, like they're probably still thinking things that aren't necessarily optimal strategies, because that's just the way things are formatted and the way you would naturally think.
Right. Nazar says that he doesn't like the snake at that point, and that's obviously, we've got totally different thoughts there, that the snake is very powerful. And I think in terms of what you're saying, like, in no capacity are we saying that any of these players are dumb or we're smarter than any of them. We have both seen these games before, and we have more time to think about them, and we're not under the pressure of all of the lights and all of these things. I'll be honest, just to reveal some of my own stupidity, I said that when I played this game, I played a character where at some point in the game I had to make a prediction, and I had a few different predictions that I could make. If my prediction about who I thought would win in certain combinations came true, then I was also a winner. I died before even making a prediction. So I certainly did not play this optimally when I played it in that capacity. And there's definitely something to be said for just like having the pressure on you, reading everything for the first time and not understanding it. However, I do think that the producers are trying to contrast Thomas and Jasper versus Rick and Nizar, who maybe don't have as quick of an understanding of the game.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Yeah, that's sort of what I was trying to say is that Rick and Nizar are not necessarily dumb by any means. Like they
Right.
got on this show because they're fairly smart people. But we're definitely seeing that people like Jasper and Tom are a step ahead in terms of this game with where their thought process is going compared to these two. And I do think that actually, yeah, a lot of this is really good sort of foreshadowing and like storytelling where not only do we have addressed like two incorrect statements about like, oh, this role is going to win and this role is going to lose that
Yeah.
are then immediately swapped by the end, but it's by the two players that arguably make the biggest blunders in the main match.
Right. Right.
So we're really setting up sort of like, unfortunately for these two, we're really setting up them as sort of the fall guys in terms of taking the brunt of the who we're supposed to laugh at for not playing optimally.
And then we see Fabian, who is the otter, winds up revealing or obtaining his role and his response to getting the otter, which we now know. Some of this was funny. I took notes on a rewatch. I just watched the episode first time with my partner and then again and took notes. And he gets the otter and says, "Oh my God, how awful," which... That's kind of another interesting reaction to throw in the mix and was kind of fun to see on the second watch. Not super impressed with the otter and winds up being a winning role. So it's not, I wouldn't say that's quite like painting him in a bad light in that one, but just kind of a funny response nonetheless.
Yeah. And it doesn't have to. I'm just saying the way that this episode played out. There were a lot of moments in this episode in the first little part that, in retrospect, are very sort of like humorous to look at
Right.
and very almost either incorrect or predictive in a way that people didn't intend it to be.
Right. We have the next thing, like Rick is like, he gets the eagle. He says the eagle's going to be so easy. And then we have Nizar, our other, forget the word that you used or the term that you used, but our fall guy of sorts in Nizar, who gets the chameleon role and disguises himself as the plover.
Yep, I mean, we've already sort of established that if you're not disguising yourself as the snake, you're not making the optimal play.
Yeah.
I think probably his mindset was that he figured if he disguised himself as the plover, he can sort of latch onto the crocodile and have that guy protect him.
Yeah.
But that's still not the most optimal because even then, it's still in the crocodile's best interest to eat you at some point. So that can get you through a couple of rounds.
I think the funniest part, maybe, I mean, I don't know. There were a lot of definite highlights in the episode for me, but I think one of, I don't know, it was a really fun moment that is kind of glazed over, and I'm not sure to what extent it was a joke or the intentions of any of the players in it, but after disguising themselves as the plover, it seems like Nizar joins the other players back at the table, and Jasper immediately says that he just does a soul read. And because Nizar, I guess, is like flipping through the pamphlet and trying to... I don't know. Jasper just knows that Nizar is the chameleon in that moment. And I think it's because he was like reading through the pamphlet and trying to figure out how to pretend to be other roles.
I think it's actually a little different. The impression I got was that he actually wasn't reading enough other roles and he was focusing too hard on the chameleon. And so Jasper was like, "Oh, why do you need to read the chameleon so much?"
Either way, yeah, that's
it could either way.
Yeah, and this gets some laughs from some of the other players at the table, and I think it could have been potentially just played off as a joke. And some of this, that's what I was getting at too. So I don't know how much of this is like language barrier because we're reading it. We don't necessarily understand how each of the players are saying each of these lines, but it seemed like that could have been interpreted as a joke still, what Jasper had said. But Nazar immediately just crumbles and says, yeah, you got me. Which, yeah.
Yeah, he immediately crumbles, which, yeah, and it makes it very clear from early on he's the Chameleon. But I do want to say that even if that wasn't the case, there is still a good possibility he could have been spotted, because our Plover in Fareed, I believe that's how you pronounce her name.
Okay.
Our Plover in her is one of the few people we see peeking at roles, and guess who she peeks at? She peeks at Nazar, and so she knows he's the Chameleon as well.
She knows he's the Chameleon. Okay, yeah, she is our criminal defense lawyer that becomes the Plover. Yeah, all of her note-taking there.
Yeah, although granted, that also might not have come up, because as we see from her later, she doesn't spend much time really talking to people, and prefers to spend time just sitting in the sky.
Yep, yeah, she's kind of a loner, but definitely taking a lot in. I think that is also... So there's a few, like, overarching concepts and strategies that you can apply to a lot of the games in the Genius. One is certainly taking a little bit more of a back seat and just reading the other players. That's how I really love to approach these games, as kind of a little bit into psychology and how people are going to play out these things, trying to see how everyone interacts and how they react to their own things. Like I said, Nazar could have potentially played it off as a joke if he wanted to. And I think that in his body language there, definitely just gives it all away after that fact. Paying attention to that kind of stuff is definitely funny. One other thing in terms of just like overarching strategies is I believe that we have Rick say, our eagle, next, that you don't really want to lie because you want to build trust. And I think that is a super, super important part of the Genius, both as an individual game in the micro sense, and then also just in the macro sense of it all, being seen as a trustworthy person that only lies when you need to in order to win the games.
I absolutely agree. Not only is it important, in my opinion, in the early game to at least come across as trustworthy so that people in future rounds will want to keep working with you.
Right.
But I also think that the dichotomy of seeing Rick talk about how you want to tell the truth to build trust, and then Jasper lying to him, and Jasper having a confessional where he says, "You can't trust me," that will probably come back to hurt me in the future. Just sort of completely sets up what essentially the storyline for this episode is, which is Jasper's sneakiness, and then how that is ultimately going to lose him trust with pretty much the whole cast, and that's going to really cost him in the end of the episode.
So we see Jasper, who knows that Rick is the eagle, because Jasper peeked at Rick. Jasper knows that Rick is the eagle and is himself the crocodile. Jasper goes up to Rick and says, "You're not the crocodile, are you?" And obviously he knows he's not the crocodile. He knows his exact role, but just everything that Jasper says is just layers and layers of these lies that will eventually come back to bite him, because it's just going to make you seem so shifty. And like the very first person that you talk to get off on that foot, definitely a little bit awkward. We see in round one, like you said, the Plover is alone in the sky, and she's just chilling out. She can take notes by herself there. And then we have the Eagle and the Snake, which is Rick and Thomas. Those two start talking to each other.
And I think that this is something where, almost ironically, especially if Thomas wanted to get attacked, Nazir crumbling really sort of made that not going to happen.
True.
Because with the chameleon out of the way, the odds that this person who you peeked at, who showed up as Snake, because I believe Rick peeked at Thomas. So
Okay.
Rick, our eagle, had peeked at Thomas, I'm pretty sure.
Okay.
So he had seen Snake. And that means that if there's already a chameleon out there, then you can pretty comfortably say that the snake's the snake.
Yeah, that's right. There was like only some, because he did peek, so the only question becomes, is this the real snake? And somebody kind of outed themselves as the chameleon, so this is definitely the snake. And they do get to form a little bit of a relationship there and talking to each other.
Yep.
Neither of them are lying, so that allows them to talk honestly. There was one thing, because Rick really leads this conversation, and Rick lets on a lot. There's no real reason to not let anything on at this point if you're Rick, but Rick goes, I know I can't eat you, this sucks. And Thomas's response is, so you're talking as if I'm the snake. That's what Thomas says. And still kind of playing a little bit cagey, which I don't know if that's actually to his benefit, but like you said, Eagle's not going to risk it, especially with the chameleon probably being revealed already there.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
then we can go to the other room.
Yeah, we can go to the other room with all of the action. We've got a lot of characters there. So seven of the players are all at this location. And I'm assuming that this is the land location, right?
It's the land location.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the first thing, right off the bat, the chameleon has revealed themselves, and Roxanne attacks Nazar, our chameleon.
Yeah, and even beyond that, I want to point out why it was so much not in the chameleon's interest to claim anyone other than Snake, just because Roxanne did end up looking at Nazar as well and saw the plover.
Right.
So whether Nazar is the plover or the chameleon, Roxanne knows that he's a safe eat.
Yeah,
and so he's basically, the second they arrive in that room, he's a dead man walking.
Yeah, exactly. And so I don't know if we talked about this too much, but as the lion, I think that I don't love attacking immediately. Maybe we touched on it some. He's a free meal. However, he's a meal that you can save. And like I was saying before with the water rat, which is where I was thinking that I brought it up, if somebody eats your meal, that's your new meal. So it doesn't even matter, and I think that could have been saved for a little bit later in the round, again, if players are playing a little bit more optimally, but there's actually no reason to really attack them there.
Yeah, I agree, but as we sort of have already talked about, some of these players, unfortunately, aren't playing optimally.
Yeah.
And I think Roxanne, unfortunately, is a big... she is one of the biggest cases where every time she ends up eating in this game, it's not a predator. She targets the prey first, despite knowing a predator.
Right.
And I think that ultimately that is sort of like the unfortunate thing where she's not in this mindset of, I have to conserve prey. She's simply in the mindset of, I have to eat one person each round. If I know a person I can eat, let's get that out of the way. I don't have to worry about that round.
I do think that she plays pretty well, and there's also some really interesting themes with Roxanne, which is in terms of, is she naive or is she playing really well, that I think the episode does a good job of going back and forth between. And again, apologies for the congestion, but I do feel like, for not having seen the game before, I think she plays the game pretty well.
I agree. I think that she plays it pretty well. I just was saying she falls into what is a trap that I think most people would fall into, of not thinking about the future rounds and how many prey are going to be there. I think she was taking it that bit too much, one round at a time approach, which for some roles is very good, but unfortunately for predators, they really have to have like a plan moving forward.
But socially, I think as well is like definitely a big strength of hers. I believe
Yes.
she's a TV presenter, correct?
Yes. TV presenter. There was one other little stipulation on
I
it,
think it
which
might have said
was just
online
online
personality.
personality.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that she, like, I don't know, it doesn't. At the very least, you think about who might have hard feelings if you attack them, and it didn't seem like Nizar was going to take it too seriously. So that is kind of a good reason to preference attacking and killing Nizar early, which is a very weird aspect of the game that you also have to consider, because somebody is going to pick somebody else to battle against at the end of the episode.
Yeah, actually, that's a really good point, is that I do think a lot of her choices are very smart from that perspective. Because in a game like this, you don't have to win every round. You simply have to not lose any of the rounds. And I think that her gameplay from that perspective, like I've been talking about it from a winning the main match perspective, but from a not losing perspective, I do think that her gameplay is very strong, especially considering like how often in the episode it gets brought up of this perception that Jasper will hold a grudge. I absolutely think in that instance, it's not in your, if that is your perception that if you screw this person over, they will come back to pick you. It is absolutely
her optimal play is to eat Jasper, but if she eats Jasper and Jasper loses, Jasper is picking her 100%. So that puts her in a really tough spot.
So from that perspective, from the perspective of playing not to lose, which I do think is probably what you want to do in this position, I do think she plays this first round actually fairly well then.
Right. And on the flip side of that, somebody making a bunch of enemies, we've got Jasper's first round, where first he attacks the deer, then he attacks the duck, before eventually finding Nelky, our water rat, and killing her. But it's just so funny, like, to talk about not wanting to have to make enemies and Jasper just having to tag 3 people in the first round. Definitely an awkward spot.
Yeah, and I think it's really funny when Nelky says, oh, well, you just lost a customer, and does this like half jokey sort of I'm upset with you, because we know what happens later in the episode.
Right.
And we know who the loser is, and we know who they pick.
Yeah.
So that line in particular, keep it in mind.
Yeah, for sure. That's basically the bulk of round 1. Then I think we can move on to round 2. But that definitely sets the stage for a lot of our characters. For round 2, we start off in the sky, and there's some interesting interactions in the sky. We've got all 3 of the birds.
Yep.
And we've got the eagle, the Egyptian plover, and then the duck as well, one of the members of the trio. One thing, because I think we've kind of been selling out Rick a little bit, our YouTuber, for some of his bad calls and things. We've given him some credit, I think, too. He was the main one that said you don't want to lie. We're about to sell him out a whole bunch more, because he's about to make potentially the biggest mistake of the episode. But I did want to give him some credit before we get to that. I liked the way that he approached this conversation with the other birds, where he says, who do you think I am? And our player that is the Egyptian plover responds, I think that, well, it's obvious you're either the duck or the eagle, revealing that she is the Egyptian plover. Which doesn't actually matter in this game, I don't think. Maybe there's some implications of that. Maybe you'd want to kill the duck while they're alone or something.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think that's the one way that this is actually a really good play, is to suss out the duck, because
Right.
by her responding like that, he
True,
knows the
true.
duck, and that should be his priority kill. And as we see, it is his priority kill. The problem then comes with the fact that he's too hungry. He can't
Yeah.
stop at one.
It's a great point, though, that it actually does wind up having like strategical implications to figure out who the duck is. And I think just his willingness and ability to ask questions like that and know to ask questions like that, I think will potentially serve him well in some future games once he has a little bit better of an idea of what's happening in the games.
I agree. We'll talk about Rick later, but I think he has some really good instincts.
Yeah.
And then
And
some
one really bad one.
one, at least in this episode, one really bad.
You could talk about it a little bit more, yeah.
Yeah. He goes on to eat the Egyptian plover, absolutely not needing to, because it's not you have to eat 3 people over the course of the game. It's you have to eat 3 rounds of the game. By doing this, he actively locks himself out of any win conditions, because he will have to visit the sky in a future round, and there is no birds that can be there with him. And considering he already hasn't eaten a round, this is just an absolute blunder of a play. It's just it's not a good look.
It's funny too because he does it, and it's not like a great social move either, because you are deliberately potentially killing 2 players. You are not actually eliminating the plover who wins with the crocodile, but you are you're still hurting her chances in some capacity. You're also, because he kind of eliminates them quickly, is then like not talking to them and not building a relationship in that capacity over the next few minutes. And in the edit, at least, he's just there to then sit by himself for the end of the round, and will eventually come to the conclusion that he made the mistake just sitting there by himself.
Yes, and I think it's very good that he came to the conclusion.
Yeah.
It shows that he at least has enough of an understanding about the game that it didn't take until the next round to realize he's screwed. Like, he didn't go into the next round and like be in the sky again and then go, oh wait, no one else can be here. Like, he realized and anticipated the fact.
Yeah.
And on top of that, we then see him then be able to think with that mindset and change his mindset from I'm trying to win to, okay, what can I do now that I've lost? And
That's
coming
a great
up,
point. Yeah.
Yeah, and coming to the conclusion that he wants to, as he calls it, do suicide with collateral.
Yeah.
And not provide himself as a meal for the other predators. And I think it's a very interesting play, because as we've been talking about, like, not wanting to upset other people, making a choice to not help anyone else out when you're losing either way, could have been an incredibly risky social play.
There were
but it
definitely
doesn't seem to come back too much for him.
Definitely some interesting choices there by Rick. And it's, while some of the choices might have been questionable, I think that it is definitely important to give him the credit to realize that he was thinking and thinking about all of the different aspects of the game. I think that one thing that we've seen a lot in the Korean version of the show, and we even see a little bit later, even in this episode, a lot of the genius is about discovery of rules and really going over the rules with a fine-tooth comb and understanding all of these different niche interactions. And for that aspect, definitely want to give Rick some credit in that he's able to get there eventually and figure out some of these more minute things.
And I think Rick is one of the players that would have most benefited from some extra time before the game started to plan things out, because I think he is someone who, if given the time to like sit and think, can come up with like solid strategies and or at least recognize what a bad strategy is.
Yeah.
And I think that had he had some more time to really like think things over before the game started. I think he would have come into the game with the mindset of needing to preserve one of the birds. I feel
Right.
like he would have been able to figure that out.
Yeah, that's fair. If we move over into the water location for round 2, then we can see that Roxanne, our lion, winds up attacking the deer.
Once again, a sort of like right away type of attack, which, as we sort of
Yeah.
talked about, is not optimal for the lion. It's not optimal for the lion from like a game in this main match perspective, but I actually don't think it's a bad strategy from trying to minimize social damage perspective, because
Interesting.
the more time you give people to sort of plead with you and be like, don't eat me, eat someone
Yeah,
else,
that's
the
true.
harder it will hurt when you eventually choose them. By going
That's a really
so
good
quickly,
point.
it's not like you almost can make it seem like you're not choosing someone or
Just had to
singling
do
someone
it.
out.
Just
It's
had to
just
kill
you're just the
somebody. Let's get
closest
it
to
over
me.
with.
Sorry. Yep.
Yep.
Tough luck.
Yeah. No, that's a really good point. One thing that I noticed was that, of course, she attacks the animal, and maybe she doesn't know what animal everybody exactly is. She winds up attacking the animal that has the same home location as her,
Yep.
attacking the deer as opposed to the otter, which is a little bit suboptimal. Again, it probably just wants to attack the crocodile, but
Yeah, and I think that that's just once again the situation of, in most instances, she attacked Nizar because she knew he was safe, and then she probably just kind of attacked oh who was the deer?
so
I don't
the
think we've mentioned her yet. That was Nuchka.
I just
Is
keep
that how you
calling
pronounce it?
her the deer, but
Yeah,
she
it's
is the
Nuchka, our
Olympic
boxer.
boxer. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know how to
Yeah. So
pronounce this name. I'm sure we're butchering a lot of
yeah,
pronunciations throughout this, but Nuchka?
but but yes, I think she was. I think she knew. I feel like the people on the land had pretty quickly figured out the trio,
Right.
considering that two of them didn't die in that instance
Yeah.
and weren't attacking anyone. That you could pretty comfortably say they were the trio. So because of that, she just was like, and actually, now that I think about it, Fabian wasn't attacked. He was one of the only
Right.
people who wasn't
Right.
attacked.
Exactly.
So, as we're going to, I probably talk about in a bit, I'm just going to bring it up now. She talks about not knowing who the snake is.
Yeah.
And I think for her, there is that possibility then that Fabian is the snake.
Yeah.
And so to attack him would be a much greater danger. So she knows that Nushka is a pretty safe bet. She can slap it on her, take her out, bada bing, bada boom, round over.
She saw Nuchka get attacked even by the crocodile in the previous
Yep.
round, and yeah, same thing. Fabian's kind of a mystery. Her big thing really is that she's just afraid of the snake. She thinks that that is the goal of the lion for this game, is to simply avoid the snake, which is certainly part of the goal of the game. But for her, that's her chief concern, and that's definitely driving a lot of her motivations.
Yes.
Whether they have
She's trying-
other implications or not, that's the biggest thing on her mind.
Yeah, she's just trying to eat a safe meal rather than going for like an optimal one.
Right. And we then see, again, Jasper say that maybe she's pretending to be naive, not letting on that she knows as much as she does. And I think that Jasper's also right. I think that she is letting on, or not letting on as much as she does know. But I think that she is also a little bit naive, just in terms of all of the players just getting used to this game. But
yeah, I don't think she's necessarily naive, but I do think that at this point she probably doesn't know who the snake is. So I don't think she's like trying to play that up.
No, that part might not be getting played up a little bit, but we do see her in the next round kind of play dumb for a little bit, I guess we'll talk about. But I did just think that was like a good observation by Jasper. And part of that, that's a little bit how I think too. When someone... I always assume that everybody, like, just assume the worst in these types of games. Assume that anybody could pull any move. And, you know, understanding the different dynamics and different capabilities of the players is certainly important. But part of that, I think, a part of that is from the fact that Jasper, I keep wanting to refer to him as a snake, but that's too tricky with all of the other animals. The beginning of the episode, they call him a wolf in sheep's clothing. So
Yes.
we can say that our crocodile is a wolf in that regard.
Yep.
And I think that when you are a wolf in sheep's clothing, you look at all of the other sheep and also assume that they're wolves. And then they can't trick you as well, because then you might have an issue of being a wolf that thinks they're attacking a sheep. And that's when you get bamboozled. So I think that was definitely interesting, both in terms of how Jasper sees the other players, but also who Jasper really is, which is that wolf in sheep's clothing, and definitely fits that description.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. But speaking of Jasper, just before we move on to the third round, I want to bring up a really interesting choice that happens where they try to almost bring Fabian into this sort of almost like predator alliance that's somewhat formed. And Jasper, despite needing to kill 3 rounds, makes the conscious choice to not even try and kill Fabian this round. Which I find really interesting, considering that he's just going to go ahead and try and do it next round. So I think that the way that these 2 rounds play out is both a very good and somewhat not so good look for Fabian, where obviously they don't know about that he suddenly, the second the duck dies, he's suddenly become immune. He's suddenly become safe. But they don't know that, and Fabian himself doesn't even know that. And I think it's really impressive from his for him that he was able to weasel his way into almost this group and protect himself for a round. I think it's, although he didn't really have much choice. No, I was going to say, I think it was a bad play to stay with the crocodile, but then I realized the lion's in the other room anyway, so either way he's getting eaten. So actually that's not so bad anymore, that he might as well be like, okay, you can eat me, crocodile, to try and earn some goodwill with the person who they think might win.
Maybe he could have tried to pretend to be the snake there or something, and gone with Roxanne instead. But either way would have played out for him the same, because he's already immune regardless. I did think that for some reason this kind of felt late to propose an alliance into round 2. I feel like a lot of the way that I wind up playing these games is you make an alliance before the game starts or at the very start of the game. And after that, you can change your alliance, but you're still more loyal to whoever you said you were loyal to at the start. Unless they screwed you over in some other capacity. No, I agree it was a little late, but I wasn't the most shocked, only because we had so little time for solid alliance building or whatever. And for a lot of these people, I think for people who aren't coming at this from a perspective of having some experience, having ideas about how they want to play it, when they came in, they didn't really know what even the format was necessarily going to be. I think it absolutely makes sense that, especially for this game, that they probably didn't want to start talking alliances or anything until they at least knew their roles. Because they probably thought it was because your instinct would be, there's probably certain roles that can't work together. And in theory there is. So they probably didn't want to form alliances that they then have to break. But I do find it interesting that in round 1, no one really proposed a solid alliance. Now, part of that can be because I think the trio thought that they were in an alliance.
Yes. I think that they had a group and an agreement for sure. And I think that actually later in the game, I think that for people, I think for the trio, having one of them win, I do think helps make them less likely to be picked as that loser. And as we see, none of them are. And I do think that probably a small part of that was Fabian's still somewhat loyalty to this trio they had formed.
I think that so there's a few other things I guess I want to say about this alliance, but it actually just made me realize that we were I suppose I was at least a little bit critical about Roxanne's ability to immediately attack the deer, as opposed to the crocodile or the otter. However, if she had just waited a little bit longer and the eagle attacks the duck in the sky, the way that timing is going to work out, if the duck had died first,
Yep.
she wouldn't have been able to even eat the deer that round. And
Yes.
maybe might have accidentally found a better play, though then both of the other two can rotate back and forth, and she probably still loses regardless. But
I mean, she was the reason I won't say that I think going so early was necessarily the greatest play from a winning the main match perspective is because she knew she had a meal in there, even if the duck gets eaten, in the sense of she had the crocodile. However, I do agree that if the duck gets eaten, those two are not separating at any point for the rest of the game.
Yeah.
So I do think it is still probably, in that instance, it actually is probably in her best interest to eat one of the prey, so long as what Jasper did, which was not eat the other one.
Right.
Then she might as well eat one of the prey.
Yeah, eat one of them. Yeah, otherwise you won't be able to. Maybe you could eat the crocodile later or something. That's definitely a possibility, as well as eating the eagle later. So there were definitely lines for her. I did, just in terms of this alliance, one thing, so I liked it from the perspective of Fabian, our otter, because it seemed like this somehow only benefited him. Not knowing that he had the safety, I feel like this is where maybe there wasn't necessarily as much time to show, but I do have to believe that this was a strong social play from his perspective to manage to stay alive in a room with two predators.
Even if it isn't an active social play, the fact that these two predators, and in particular Jasper, who was the one who, because Roxanne had already eaten, I don't think she ever, from her perspective, I don't think she ever does the like two eats in one play.
Right, exactly.
So I think that she's pretty safe. I think for Jasper to like Fabian enough to want to work with him is the really important and like crucial thing, and that really shows that like he is doing a good job at endearing himself to people, like doing a very good job. And I agree that not knowing that the otter is safe, making this deal really does sort of only benefit the otter because it puts the crocodile at risk of starving in a later round. It doesn't do much for the lion. Other than out of this deal, she does get told who the snake is.
Right.
But yeah, like for the most part, the otter getting an extra round to try and make something happen is very big and very beneficial to it.
Now, having said that, here's why I think that this deal was actually the best for Jasper. So I think that there's a chance, and you just gotta walk with me here, there's a chance that Jasper might have fully solved this game. I want to give him enough credit in understanding all of the other aspects and how well he played a lot of this episode, in recognizing that Jasper might know that the lion eating him is how he dies and loses, other than what winds up happening and misunderstanding the trio aspect. Jasper's big play here is to say, no, let's just stop all eating this round. There's no reason for anybody to eat anything. And in another universe, maybe Jasper also always eats after the lion, which I think is a good thing as well. If Jasper was a little bit more bold and striked first, then maybe he's thinking that will give the lion the idea to eat the crocodile. And I think that is a huge part of why we see this alliance and why we see a lot of his moves. So I do think that it's a pretty good play from his perspective as well.
I do actually agree in the sense of yeah, I really agree that avoiding the lion eating you is absolutely one of your top priorities as a crocodile, because that is like one of your biggest dangers. And I do think had he struck first in the round, I absolutely, particularly had he struck on the deer, had he eaten the deer, I think that 100% he is the next person eaten because of the mystery surrounding Fabian. I think if he eats Fabian, then there's the possibility that she still eats the deer. But even then, that's like a risk that you probably don't want to take. I do think it's good. And I do think that this, even though I think that forming like a solid alliance doesn't, and like choosing not to eat the otter doesn't benefit him that much, thinking that he can eat the otter later, the fact that he actually couldn't eat the otter the whole time, it benefits him so much to have that on his side, because then when it comes to picking a person to lose, he has someone of the winners who is then able to sort of, and I don't want to jump ahead too much, but do you mind if I talk about the picking the loser just briefly?
Sure. I just want to say that now you have me thinking that Jasper also knew the specifics of the trio rule and was pretending to make this alliance knowing that he couldn't eat Jasper anyways.
I don't think
Probably
so.
not, but it's an idea.
But if he did, then yeah, then this is absolutely the best interest, because having Fabian be there, like when they're discussing who loses, we see Thomas bring up Jasper and say that people wanted Jasper picked for the bottom. And Fabian immediately jumps in with like, no, he's going to hold a grudge. We can't pick him. He's the person we shouldn't pick.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if that's just because he was genuinely worried about the grudge, but I have to think that a small part of that is that he feels like he can work with Jasper, and that by protecting Jasper, or at the very least not being the one to betray him, helps him in the event, of course, that Jasper survives. It makes him one of the people Jasper would be most willing to work with.
For sure. Yeah, that was, definitely just trying to reach out and make some social connections, especially when you have lied to specific people.
Yep.
It's not even a crazy strategy to, in a game like this, so Jasper knows... I'm in my head a little bit, but sometimes in a game like this, you could make a deal where you say, listen, I'm not even going to eat you. I'm never going to try to eat you. I want you to win, because the winner of this game also gets to pick the loser. I want to have some input in that as well, in exchange for not eating you. I'm going to kingmake. I'm going to allow you to win this game, but in exchange, maybe let's pick Nazar, who Roxanne ate, and let's pick potentially Nuchka, who Roxanne ate. Let's pick one of those two people as the first people for the deathmatch. Then maybe we're both safe, and then you build a really strong alliance there too.
Yeah, and that's one of the big reasons I don't think he actually figured it out, because I think if that's the case, then in the third round, when it was only the two of them, instead of spending the whole time being like, why aren't you dead? What's happening? You could be like, okay, so you're not dead. I guess you're immune. You're probably going to win.
Yeah.
If you're going to win in this instance, how about doing me a little favor and doing this because I didn't eat you in an earlier round?
Yeah.
You could try and barter there, and I don't think Jasper's the type of person to play it passive and not try and make a deal. I think he's absolutely someone who would.
There's deals to be made. At the very least, the easy deal is not me. The more aggressive deal is, let's try to both, and if you do this for me, one of the really interesting things about games like this is asking people for favors. While it can seem aggressive and seem a little bit bold, somebody that owes you a favor is then going to feel allied with you. And so if he were to ask Fabian to put in either Nazar or Nuchka, then we're going to have a scenario, or he can put in either of the birds, right? And those birds very well might pick Rick to go to the death match with. So that could have definitely been an angle that we saw happen from Jasper. That's not something that I'm expecting somebody to go for with zero experience of the entire show format. But that's definitely something that I think more seasoned players might think about.
And if I'm being honest, I think for Jasper in particular, to go for such a bold strategy, he already had such like a visible, he was already being talked about as a sneaky player. To try and pull something like this off, I actually think would have backfired on him. But at least try and like leverage the position of you're going to die, this person's going to win, and just imply that like you would like if he were to pick someone who you didn't directly, the one person you directly like, not cause the loss of because she hadn't lost when he ate her, but like you eliminated from the game and took away her like agency of affecting the outcome for. Just sort of asking if he could pick any of the other players who weren't you or that person is not like aggressive, and it's the type of thing where they'd probably feel like, well, that's a small enough ask, I could probably do it.
So this game is obviously, the Genius is all about like playing these games and trying to figure out these games, but the social implications of basically everything are sometimes way more important. And I think a lot of the rest of the episode is almost entirely focused on the social aspect of everything. We do have, I mean, they show the snake. The snake's already won this game. Snake doesn't have to do anything. Snake probably won this game round one, but they've definitely mathematically won the game at this point. And then we touched on it, but we see the decision from Rick that they are going to be a clever moron and stay in the sky and suicide with collateral, as he put it there.
Essentially, dooming the other two. The only one, assuming that the otter, is still edible. The only one at that point who could win would be the lion, eating both the crocodile and the otter.
Right. And could also could also eat the eagle, or you're saying if Rick stays.
But I'm saying if Rick stays, he essentially guarantees the crocodile's loss and also makes it very difficult for the lion. And so I do think that part of his decision is this. I'm not positive at this point, but I feel like he knows at this point that Jasper wasn't super truthful with him in their first discussion, and I don't think he's super happy with Jasper.
I got that same impression.
And because of that, I think that his choice was consciously that he knew Jasper was a predator, and so he just made the conscious choice of, by doing this, I screw over the predators, and therefore I screw over Jasper. And so I do think that was sort of where his choice came in, and why he made it.
For sure. Definitely interesting there. Like you said, this kind of puts Rick in a spot where now Rick is choosing to make an enemy out of somebody, and choosing to make somebody lose while also losing themselves, which might not be the best strategy in terms of all of the social aspects of everything. I do think that Rick is probably able to play this off somewhat as kind of a goof as well, has the patterned silly shirt, and also makes the biggest mistake of the episode. So there's definitely some evidence that Rick might be a little bit of a goof.
I think Rick absolutely is able to get away with the play of just saying, well, I had already lost, so I just decided to not bother moving. And I hadn't even thought about the implications on the other players.
Exactly.
Like, I think he can absolutely claim that, and no one would bat an eye. So I think that he is able to get away with this minor, like, spiteful get back at Jasper without really any social repercussions.
Yeah. We do see a lot more of the social dynamics come into play in the third round when we finally have our head-to-head, the snake in Thomas and the Lion in Roxanne. They finally get together.
Yeah. For sure, they have a talk, and they both know who the other person is
Yeah.
essentially at this point. Um, and they both know what the outcome of this round is going to be. So it's sort of just them talking about, like, they already know the outcome, so they can just talk about other players and like how they sort of want the rest of the round to go. Like we see Thomas, yeah, we see Thomas ask Roxanne if she knows who the other predators are.
Yeah, which I think is like a really interesting moment because Thomas knows one of the predators from his peek, right? Yeah, he peeked at Jasper. And he also knows that she's the lion at this point, and he knows that Rick is the eagle because Rick was alone in the sky. And he knows all of those things. There's not many players left in the game. She could probably figure out that he knows all of those things. I think this was actually kind of a mistake from Roxanne. She plays that a little bit cagey. And I understand why. She's talking with the snake. This is her fears come true. But she's a little bit cagey with her information, and she doesn't even let on that Jasper's the croc. Thomas is actually the one that reveals that info. In at least the conversation that we see. There's a little bit of a jump cut.
Yeah. I think you can come at it from two perspectives. From one perspective, it does make her look like less of a threat because she she tries to play it off as like, well, I don't really know what's going on.
Is she naive or is she lying? Those are the questions you've got to ask.
But I do think that ultimately, I do think it feels a little more, and it could just be from our perspective as a viewer. Obviously, we have no clue how Thomas took it, but it does feel slightly more cagey and like she's just doesn't want to say rather than she just doesn't fully know.
Yeah. Because if you're Thomas, you have to be thinking you were just in the same room with the crocodile on that first round, and maybe there's a scenario where the crocodile just never killed, or maybe she accidentally ate the crocodile in that first round and didn't know or something. But because Thomas knows who the crocodile is, he knows that the crocodile's been eating, she doesn't know that Thomas knows that. But I do think that Thomas had all of the puzzle pieces there to put together to know that she was being deliberately cagey.
I agree. I think if he didn't know the crocodile, then she would more be able to get away with it because she would be able to make it maybe seem like the two that are in the water area are the otter and the water rat.
Right.
And that she ate the crocodile in the first round. And that's what, like, after the crocodile ate someone else. But even then, because two people died, unless she ate two people in the first round, the implication is that she ate one person, the crocodile ate one person. So she'd still know. So she'd still have an idea. So I do think that it was a very risky play for her to make. I don't think it ultimately costs her, really.
It doesn't. But it's a risky play to make to the most powerful role in the game, who's about to decide who lost the game. You don't want to lie to the snake. Like I said earlier, the snake doesn't really actually want to be a snake and doesn't want to lie. But more importantly than that, you don't want to piss off the person that's going to win the game.
No, I absolutely agree. And that's where, like, her good work in the first two rounds of, like, ensuring that people are unlikely to pick her in retaliation, if they're picked to be, like, in the deathmatch, that they won't pick her. She then doesn't do a great job in the third round, unfortunately, with Thomas here. Yeah, and she is lucky that it doesn't affect her too much, and he doesn't end up picking her to be in danger there.
She does do something that I do think is very good, and it's a strategy that I really like in the Genius. I know that there are some players that might not necessarily always be like being on the receiving side of this strategy. I talked about king making. I feel like what she does is villain making, and she has a big part in the narrative. I can find one of her quotes here. She says, Jasper would screw over anyone and anything to win this game. That's what I realized. Everyone, his entire family. And then Thomas says he bluffs, he negotiates, and she says it isn't bluffing, it's just lying. And really works to just make Jasper out to be the villain, painting a target on him, but socially, I think that's a good play. What do you think about that there?
I think ultimately, because Jasper leaves this round, it was a very smart play, because she does help sort of unify people. She makes people feel like they'll know where she stands, because she is one of the most open people about not liking Jasper and wanting Jasper out.
Exactly.
So like it makes people feel like they know where she stands. They can trust her. She's willing to like actively target people rather than like play scared and maybe target them instead. Like she'll go after the people who she feels betrayed her, which also makes people less want to betray her. So I think she does a really good job, of pushing this narrative. And I think it does definitely really help her. I think if Jasper survives, then it becomes a lot trickier because all of a sudden, like on one hand, you still have this clear target, so that's good where you don't have to make a new one. But on the other hand, if that person gets any sort of power, you are in a lot of trouble.
You're in a lot of trouble. There's also, say Thomas wanted to protect Rick, for instance. He doesn't want Rick to see the death match for whatever reason. He can pick Roxanne with a pretty good idea that she's going to be picking Jasper because there is that clear target. So you kind of make yourself a target together with the other person, and that can be a little bit scary. But I still like the initiative. It's partially just because it's the way that I like to play the Genius, in trying to have allies, trying to have clear sides and a clear enemy that we can root against. But
and I think that one of the things that really helps her is that her and Jasper are, in this episode, I would say, the most active players.
Yes.
They're the ones most forming social connections, coming up with plans for better, like forming social connections for better and, in Jasper's case, for worse. But I think because there isn't like 5 different people who are all actively pushing their agenda, because she's the only one doing it, and a lot of other people for this first episode are taking more of a backseat role.
Right.
It allows her to push her agenda and not have pushback and have people just go, well, it's not me, so I'm willing to go along with it.
Exactly.
And so I think that really helps her.
It's that first vote off in Survivor or Big Brother where somebody points the finger, and sometimes that comes back to you, but a lot of times it's just, okay, that's not me, let's go with it. And somebody being willing to make that claim, I think, is definitely a bold move. But I like bold moves. I like that she was really willing to play and really sell him down the river in this capacity. She's also, I think, telling her own truth. I don't think that she is fabricating things in a way that she feels uncomfortable with. She's been with Jasper the past 2 rounds. She just saw how he was kind of willing to make this deal. And the important thing about the deal is she feels probably in this instance like Jasper is currently causing her to lose. Because if there wasn't as much open discussion where Jasper said, I'm going to go with the otter to the river, you go back to the land, then maybe she would have had real food this round. So I think she's blaming Jasper and thinks that Jasper was wheeling and dealing to make her lose, and that kind of absolves her of the sin of throwing Jasper under the river here or into the water.
Yeah. And even if he didn't specifically screw her over, just the fact that she does believe the notion that he's shifty and he's willing to betray people makes what she's saying sound more truthful, because it is her truth.
Exactly.
And that will always be more convincing than just trying to bluff away a lie and talk about someone in a way that they really aren't.
Yeah. We can jump into the water and talk about that. Here's where we have the big rules reveal from the announcers, or not the announcers, I guess, but the announcer of the show. To the
one
audience.
who talks to the audience.
Yeah, and we are going to hear that the otter is actually safe because the deer and the duck are now dead. And like I said earlier, being totally honest, this got me. And I know it got me 2 years ago, I'm sure, but it got me again just this week watching this episode. And they kind of, they just graze over it in this version of the show. Like it was probably only on screen, but it's not like I had the rule book in front of me, right? Which would have been a different case, but definitely got me. This was a funny moment to me, and definitely a lot of fun, and it got the players as well.
Yeah, it got me in the sense of I genuinely wasn't sure whether or not the show was going to keep the one person remains their autoimmune rule, only because all of the players were so confident that it wasn't the case that I almost started thinking maybe the show said that isn't the case. Yeah. And especially with
only 10 players.
But with only 10 players, having that and then there was discussion as well about if one player solo wins, giving the ring, and Jasper and Fabian talking to each other about, if you solo win, give the ring. And I was thinking, if that's the case, then you kind of have to, because there's so few situations where a solo win can happen.
I don't think it's possible.
It is. Okay. I actually spent some time thinking about it.
Okay, let's hear it.
The only situation in which a solo win happens is if one of the trio, so for example, let's say the duck, happens to survive long enough. The duck and the plover and the water rat are all not dead. Well, the other prey die and all of the predators starve to death. If that is the case, then because the duck will win, the plover and the water rat will not win because their predators are dead, and the snake won't win because there's that one extra person. There's that 4 instead of a 3.
Sorry, who's the fourth? Oh, the snake themselves is the fourth player alive. Oh, wow. Okay, you cracked it. Nicely done. Nicely done.
But other than that scenario, it is impossible to happen. Because there was so mumuch talk about it, I started to think would they be showing this talk about a solo win if it was
that was a total red herring.
For because if the duck or whatever is able to die, then it becomes even more possible for a solo win. If the duck and the otter can die when they're by themselves, because then it's very likely that the snake just ends up being the last person alive and solo wins because of that.
What's really funny in that scenario is if you are the Egyptian plover or the water rat, you win by attacking the snake and no, never mind. No, I'm sorry. I'm totally off base. I'm trying to think you could make the snake lose, but that doesn't help you. So you've already lost regardless. You might as well just let the snake win. I was thinking, would there be some interesting scenario where you want to kill yourself by attacking the snake, and I guess you could make them lose, or you could make the snake, okay, I've got it. So if you're the snake, you say to the Egyptian plover or the water rat, that's where I got confused. You want them to attack you so that you win. So you ask them to attack you knowing that they've lost regardless.
Well, that's what you would do if you were the snake in that case. And I think there's also the interesting discussion that...
And there's no reason not to. If you're the plover or the water rat, there's no reason not to just let the snake win. Unless you don't like them.
Unless you were promised that extra ring from the otter or duck or whatever, in which case you don't want to.
Yeah.
But if you weren't, and since it can only go to one of them, the one that isn't might as well help the snake win to earn some goodwill.
True. There might be a little bit of finagling with the different locations and who actually gets to talk, but that's funny. There is a way for the snake to lose and one player to win.
Yes, but as I said, incredibly unlikely. The situation that would have to arise to have 3... I guess it could be the lion eats the other 2 predators and then starves, but even then, with 3 prey... only 2 of them are edible, so as long as those 2 aren't in the room with the lion at that point, it's...
Yeah, okay. Yeah, because the lion still has to eat the other two from the trio.
Unless they starve.
I can kind of come up with a scenario where it works, where you are the water rat, but you are secretly working with the otter, like we talked about earlier. You ditch the lion and then get the tail.
Or you're just not playing optimally and you end up going to a different room.
Yeah.
But the odds of that happening were pretty slim. So that's just why it took me a bit aback when people were talking about solo wins. Because in my mind, that was an incredibly unlikely outcome for this game.
I didn't quite do the math, because I was thinking that potentially a snake could solo win, not realizing the trio rule. Which, once you understand the trio rule, a snake solo win becomes impossible because somebody from the trio is the only person that can get a solo win.
Yeah, because one person from the trio, at minimum, will always win this game.
Yeah, which makes them pretty powerful roles. And like we said, the otter's initial reaction was... This is terrible.
Didn't like it.
Yeah, and then cut to now, we've got the otter and the snake, and they are congratulating each other on their win.
Yep.
I guess to back up for a second, one other thing I forgot, just to touch on it, Roxanne does still, we did talk about it earlier, I believe as well, but Roxanne does attack the snake just in case.
Yes.
Good move.
Yep.
Didn't work. I'm glad you tried it.
As I brought up with like the chameleon strategy, the one downside of claiming snake is that it is still completely in Roll's best interest to, if it's only you and them, attack you anyways, just in the slight chance that something got messed up and you were the chameleon the whole time.
Yeah.
Even if they're like almost 100% confident you're the snake, they might as well try.
Yeah.
And I like that Roxanne did try, because if it was the situation where if it did somehow turn out that Fabian or whatever was the snake and her not knowing about the otter rule, that could have been her saving herself.
The two winners that we have in Thomas and Fabian are both very, and we talked about some of the cool things that each of them did. Really, though, they're very passive in terms of getting to this point and getting the win. We at least didn't see their big moves or hear about their big moves.
And as I sort of said at the start with the storytelling, is that you essentially have 3 active roles and 7 passive roles.
Yeah.
Who they can try to avoid dying, but they can't make any actual real like major effects on the game. And so because of that, having 2 people who aren't predators be the last 2, be the ones who win, there just isn't any real big moments, because unless someone like Fabian has a moment where he stands up and rats out someone else and like saves himself that way, there just isn't a big moment to point to, because they played fine, they played well, they did what they needed to get to the end, but that's not the flashiest thing to do.
And I also want to, as kind of a defender of this game a little bit and the format as a whole, I actually like the fact that we see a game with randomly decided roles. I personally like that. I know that some players are against it. I think that it does a number of things for us in this first episode. When we're still learning all of the characters, I'm referring to half of them by their animals.
By their
some
roles.
of that is going to stick. I still look at some of the particularly the lion from the Korean version of the Genius, and I look at him and I see a lion. You know, that's just... And I think some of these things will follow with them. Jasper, maybe a wolf more than a crocodile. But yeah, I think that that's like an interesting aspect. And also, it's hard to follow the motivation of 10 different players that were all meeting for the first time all at once. And for that aspect, I think that having 3 players more in the driver's seat does help in terms of introducing the game and introducing the characters to the audience.
I do agree. The one problem I have with it is the unfortunate thing that was sort of beyond their control, which is the length of the episode.
Yeah.
I think if the episode was longer, this could be a very strong game to have. I think the problem is because it was so short, there were so many rules that you could only go over them quickly and like one time that they become, for an audience who has never seen this game before, they can very easily become hard to follow.
Oh, for sure.
Due to so many different roles, each with their own goal, each with their own ability, each with their own home location.
Yeah.
There's 3 different locations. Like there's a lot to take in. And so I think had this episode been a bit longer so that they could go over the rules a bit more, I think it would be much stronger. But as it is, I don't hate it from the perspective of just coming up with a first episode game. Like it's used in the first episode of the Korean version.
Yes.
And I think it's fine there because they have the time to go over everything. In this episode, I do think it just suffers a little bit from the lack of time.
My partner was
fairly solid though.
Yeah, my partner was asking me as we watched it together how I was like following any of this. She was like, "What? Like, you understand everything that's happening right now? How?" And I was like, "Okay, well, I've seen this game before, but had I not seen this game before, I might have been much, much more lost in terms of watching this for the first time." So I could definitely see that, especially with the shorter format. The biggest weakness that I think that the game and the episode had is that this is a game that did not have a loser. It had 8 losers. So the winners had to pick a loser, which isn't the typical format. And if you're not familiar with the show, I think that's a really important point to bring up, because this was a really weak part of the episode. I thought that the 2 passive players then had to pick between the other 8 people, and it's very much just random at that point. I mean, there's relationships, of course, but that didn't really feel that satisfying. And to that aspect, I'm kind of glad that Jasper went home, because we could understand that, whereas if Nelky had gone home, that would have been very confusing. We wouldn't have understood why.
Yeah, I completely agree. From the storytelling of the episode, Jasper needed to lose the deathmatch. Nelky leaving would have been a fairly confusing, like, what did she do wrong? What happened to cause this? With Jasper, there was a clear reason. So from a storytelling perspective, he needed to lose for the episode to have like a satisfying ending, if that matters to people, which to some people it does. And from a television show perspective, you want that. But on top of that, I do think that, that's a huge detriment to the game, is especially because it's the first game. These people barely have relationships with each other at this point, that they don't have that much to go off of. So as you said, the picking does become somewhat random. If this was like the second or third round in a game, in like the show, then there would be pre-existing relationships. We would know this person winning would likely mean that they want this person to lose. And it would help us more easily follow why someone like Nelky, who didn't really do much wrong and does ultimately feel like it was just kind of a, well, we ruled out a couple of people and then just picked one of the remaining ones at random. It would help it feel a little better than that.
Yeah, we do see a lot more justification for Jasper, obviously. We see Roxanne say to pick Jasper, and then one other thing, after we see Nelky actually pick Jasper, Jasper kind of has a quip to both of the winners, and half-jokingly, again, all of these things are going to be half-jokingly, blames them for him going into the deathmatch.
Yep.
Which I think might be totally inconsequential. But it might be one other thing for Thomas and Fabian to say when the game winds up being such a socially based deathmatch game. Jasper's already blaming us a little bit for this. He can go. He can go. Nelky will get over it, which I don't know if she will. But Jasper's blaming us too. So previously they maybe had some incentive to try to make Jasper win, but of course that's not going to be what happens here. We are going to see a very social-based deathmatch. We probably have a lot of words to say about what type of deathmatch this is, and I think that when we talk about like the beginning of the episode, everybody has their own strengths and different things that they play to. I think that that's definitely true, and it's good for games to be able to test. Like, we're going to see deathmatch games that maybe test memory or test logical abilities and strategic abilities. Testing the social is something that I think is a little bit of a contentious point in just in terms of everything, because we saw Jasper go here through no fault of his own. Everybody else collectively decided Jasper's the bigger threat, and the death matches are kind of supposed to protect those threats. So this was an area where being perceived as a bigger threat really, again, sold him down the river. Another crocodile pun there for you, but I think if you want to talk a little bit about social death matches.
Yeah, I completely agree. I'm of the perspective that social death matches should, at best, be very infrequent, only because, in my opinion, main matches are that, like, strong blend of social play and, like, maneuvering with other people while having this strategic play. Well, death matches are supposed to be between the two players, and that's it. Like, you see Jasper say when they're setting up for the death match, you see him say, "This is it, one-on-one." And it's a little funny and ironic because this game was anything but one-on-one, and was honestly
this was 9-on-1.
Yeah, it was. Well, yeah, it showed probably the where people stand socially way better than the main match did, which was people like supposed to be interacting. The one-on-one game helped us understand other people outside of the death match probably way more than the main match did.
Yeah, we definitely get some interesting character insights, and for that aspect, I think that it is strong. Keep all of your players involved throughout the entirety of the first episode, so that aspect's kind of good. I also think that if you... I'm kind of two minds. I at one point hate it because I have got a fear that I'm going to be perceived as a threat, get thrown into a death match where I've got absolutely no control, and be eliminated from the game in a way that feels somewhat unfair based off of the rest of the format. I do think that if social capabilities are one area, because they really are an area of intelligence, and I do think that it's fair to say that there are people that aren't good at a lot of other things but are geniuses as far as making friends and just being a sociable and a likable person, and that's something that should also be respected as an important skill, right? And if you have to do that, I guess putting it as the first death match, both before any players have the chance to prove themselves as a threat and before we really get attached to anybody, I guess it's the best place to put it.
Yeah.
Though it's at the same time an awkward introduction to the series for people that haven't seen it before.
I have maybe a somewhat hot take, which is that, well, I hate this deathmatch from like a gameplay perspective. Well, maybe hate's too strong a word, but I don't think it's very good.
You would hate to play it yourself.
Yes. From a gameplay perspective, if I was a player or if I was setting up a game, this is the type of game I would try and avoid.
Yeah.
That being said, I think from a TV perspective, this is actually a very good first deathmatch because we needed that extra time with these players who we barely got to sort of see in the main match. Because because the episode was so short, we can't have half the episode only be between two characters, one of which is about to be no longer in the show. Like, So from a TV perspective, I do think that this was probably a decently strong choice.
Yeah.
I just hope that they don't continue this with like the episodes moving forward and the death matches start to become more of a one-on-one situation rather than, as you put it, a 9-on-1 situation.
And did we have any instances in the I'm not a huge Genius historian, but are there any instances you can think of where a social death match has been used either late into the season, or is there any chance, like, was this game replayed in like a finals in any capacity or something like that?
It was actually, this game was replayed in a
I
finals.
thought so. That
Yeah, which
seems
was
terrible.
it was an awful choice. Literally, if you look up, it was used in the so bit of a spoilers. It was used in the second season's
Right.
finals.
Okay,
And if you
that's what I
look up
thought.
the TV tropes recap for it, its recap of that part of the finale literally just says, okay, so this game is for Formation, which is a great name,
Yeah.
but it's taken from a game called Quattro from the Genius.
Okay.
And in the recap of the finale on TV tropes, when it gets to the round where they play Quattro, it just says, they played Quattro, this player won. See Games of Luck.
Yeah. Yeah. It's unfortunate. I mean, if you're gonna have it as the second game in the finals, then I think the participants are all incentivized to just like tie the score or something, which is probably what happens in the finals of the second season.
Oh no! It was used as the last game in the finals. It was the one that decided the winner.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So as long as this show doesn't do that, I can forgive its use of Quattro here in the first.
Even
episode.
then, it basically becomes like the jury deciding. But what's so crazy about this game is it's not like everybody has a vote. We'll get to it a little bit, but I believe that it's Thomas who eventually has
he
voices,
becomes the deciding factor.
He voices that he is going to decide who wins or loses this game. Any of the individual players also could have taken that role, though, if they wanted to. They might not have had the cards for them, but they could have said, oh, I have the blue 8, trade with me last, while having nothing.
Oh.
Like, anybody can say anything and take the fate of the game in their own hands.
But I do think in an instance like that, it's not in your best interest.
No, not at all.
Your cards are, and like take that in your fate. So I do think that really the ones who were most likely to become kingmakers were any of the players who had the 7s and the 8s.
Right.
Because those were like the big high value cards that people were going to want.
Yeah.
And and so Thomas voices that he has the exact card that Nelka needs.
Yeah.
And makes himself into the kingmaker.
I do want to break down some of the other parts before we get to that, if it's all right, too. Just because, like you said, they do reveal some interesting elements of how these players are going to play these games. And the first thing that we see is Roxanne, again, kind of being a little bit of a shark. Roxanne says that she has no good cards, but I believe she had the green 8. We've got some notes here, right? Yeah, she's got the green 8, which she doesn't want to give. So at this point, Nelk's already revealed her green 7. So she doesn't want to give this green 8 to Jasper and says that she just doesn't have anything good. She says she has all low cards. And this is potentially... I think this said a lot of things in this moment because it's potentially her overplaying a little bit. But she is also incentivized to make sure that Jasper gets out of the game because she is obviously supporting Nelk. So, yeah, just really interesting. But sorry?
Yeah, and I think that this ultimately, she can get away with it because of the fact that she didn't give away the green 8.
Yeah.
Because she gave both players low cards, I don't think anyone's going to look at her like, oh, she was sneaky. They're just going to assume that someone had the 8 and they won't know who, and just it never showed up. And that's just the way the game rolled. I think it could come back to her if they start to think about it and like really focus in on figuring out.
The players, I think, had a good view of each other's hands and things, though, which kind of allowed them
Oh,
to.
that's true.
It allowed them really to act as a collective group, which I think
Yep.
really hurt Jasper. But
Yes.
almost what I took in that moment was her holding up her cards to all of the other women, mostly, and saying, "No, I don't have any good cards. Nudge, nudge, we're getting Jasper out." And really be the one to lead that
I see.
charge as the lioness there.
I see. Yeah, actually, that's a fair point. If other players were able to see her cards, then it completely changes the tone of the move.
Yeah.
And I do think, I still don't think it's going to hurt her too much because enough people were also thinking, let's screw over Jasper,
Yeah.
that she's not going to get singled out for it. But I do think, I do agree that Roxanne feels like a player to me, who
Yeah.
at some point in this game, people are going to start turning on her and looking at her as a big threat that like needs to be stopped. And I think that this isn't going to help her when that time comes.
Yeah. Because right after that, we see Anamaya, is that how you say it? The chess player. And she also lies to Jasper, almost like immediately after that. So I really took this as all of the players really getting on the same page and Roxanne leading that charge. I do think there is even something interesting. You brought up before, Roxanne is very incentivized to send Jasper home. Otherwise, it could come back to bite her. I think that that's probably true, though there is at least an idea worth exploring of, is it okay for Roxanne to keep her target in the game so that way she can be allies with everybody else? And for her, if this was a game of skill and Jasper walked away from it, she's almost in a better position because, as you can see in this deathmatch, in the next main match, she would have been able to rally everybody against Jasper. I think quite easily she would have taken charge in that. So now she doesn't have a target after she's going to be able to get Jasper eliminated in this one.
I think though, if she were to do that, it would have to be under the guise of playing it fairly and trying to like do what's best for both players, knowing that her green 8 is going to do Jasper a world better than either of her 2s are going to do for now.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Like, because if she outright helps Jasper, then I think that that is a huge red flag to like a bunch of people. And I think given what she said, if people could see her hand, I do think she kind of has to go against Jasper because she's been beating the drum so much that it would be a little strange to the other players for her to suddenly change that. And I think could really hurt this perception of her being this like straightforward, you know where she stands, and start giving her a bit more of a snaky reputation.
Yeah. Are there any other moves that you wanted to talk about other than the red 7? Because that's the only other thing I had notes about, but sounds like you might have had some more things.
There were really only 2 things, and it was sort of, I wanted to bring up, I believe it's Rick who uses the term malicious compliance when describing a strategy.
Okay.
Which I think is a good one, which is where he helps Nelk, but he doesn't like directly hurt Jasper. He gives Jasper a card that's right in the middle. So it looks like maybe he was trying to help Jasper without really doing it. And I think that that's very good for him because, as he says, if Jasper survives, he can go, well, I tried to help you and look, it worked out. You survived. And but he's still increasing the odds that Nelk can win and Jasper will lose without making it obvious. And I think that that was a good play on his part. And the other one is I just wanted to bring up really quickly. We haven't talked about her much, but Fareed, the criminal defense lawyer, she's one of the few players who just sort of outright says, I'm just going to help both players and you can tell me what you want and I'll give you what you want if I have it. And that's what she does. And I think that that will be an interesting dichotomy because I think that I think that she could be a player who could get, as we sort of talked about, that like honest reputation as someone who's like pretty upfront and like isn't super snaky. And I think if she can get that, that could really help her.
She winds up being able to help out Nelk a lot more. But yeah, trying to help both of the players, I think, is definitely good for your own game, because so much random could happen. Maybe Thomas at the very end, like if Thomas sees that everybody else is playing against Jasper, but then he can make an ally out of Jasper and get rid of the person that he sent to the deathmatch. It was a little bit surprising that he didn't consider going for that in the end. But I do think that, especially with, I guess just again to bring up, I think Roxanne's play, I really do think was like intentionally trying to further drive the anti-Jasper narrative and get that message across to the other players there.
But if I remember right, I didn't write down the exact order that things happened, but I think that she made her trade to Jasper before Roxanne made her big play. So she doesn't even necessarily have like the situation where. So I don't think she has the situation where Roxanne made this obvious, we're all targeting Jasper. Which if it happened after, then I think it can hurt her for being like, well, you were still helping him. But if it happened before, which I think she might have been Jasper's like first or second trade, he at least traded with her before he traded with Roxanne, and I know he traded with Roxanne early.
She ultimately is the one that gives the yellow 8 to Nelk. So it doesn't really matter if she helped Jasper a little bit. She certainly helped Nelk more in that regard. Yeah,
I just wanted to mainly bring up that I think that she might be consciously, with both of her gameplay, where also like in the main match, she sort of just takes to herself and tries not to make enemies. I think her strategy might be just to take this sort of approach of just don't make enemies, have people think that they can like work you, that you're not going to be a problem for them, and that can take you far. And I feel like she might be able to do it, but it's still very early for that to be like too concrete of a like impression of what the other players have of her.
I think that we can go on to the Red 7 now with Thomas. That was definitely the pivotal moment of the death match. Nelk, I think, my perspective was because of some of the other things that happened with Roxanne. I felt like she felt maybe a little bit more emboldened as it was going on and things were going in her favor, that she felt comfortable enough to ask for the Red 7, whereas maybe early on she wouldn't have felt quite as comfortable to do so. She asked for the Red 7, which is in the hands of the snake, at least narratively. He is the snake by the role, so could we potentially see the snake actually make a snaky move here? I thought that was a fun kind of aspect to it all.
Yes, and I think that this is, I think this is another instance where Roxanne's pushing of this narrative comes back to whether or not it's best for her that Jasper is gone. She wants Jasper gone, and I think that her strong pushing of that helps to make it happen, because it's really easy to snake out and keep Jasper if you feel like you have a better relationship with him than Nelk, if that's the only decision. You're only choosing between Jasper and Nelk. But in this instance, Roxanne had like made it clear that she wanted Jasper out. Other players were helping her. I can understand that there would probably be a fear that, well, you would maybe gain an ally for betraying Nelk and keeping Jasper. You could also make a bunch of enemies by doing that. And so
you make a bunch of enemies. It's not just that you make Roxanne as an enemy. She's now collected a few other people on her side, and you do make one really, really good ally.
Yes.
But you make a few more enemies than that and really isolate yourself.
And I think for this early in the game,
to yourself.
Yeah, and I think if it was later and it was like the final 6 or whatever, I would say go for it. But this early in the game, I think Thomas made the absolute right call to just sort of stick with the group and keep within the collective and not draw attention to himself, because as we see, the player who drew the most attention to himself has suddenly become the player eliminated.
Which is a horrible lesson. It's a horrible lesson as far as trying to encourage fun gameplay and stuff. But
Yes.
yeah, that is how it is going to wind up playing out. Nelk also realizes that she can't take the red 7 right away, which is good. It's great that she noticed that.
Good,
that they do
good
have
on
to
her,
trade
for sure.
with every single person, so she's no slouch. We haven't seen really anything from her up until this point, but she can at least recognize the basic parts of the game, and that's great. So
Yeah, I think for a deathmatch that was pretty simple and largely decided by how many friends you have. She played it pretty much as optimally as she could have.
Yep. And by choosing to not take the red 5 right away, of course, that's going to introduce the drama where now Jasper can ask for the red 7. And we've kind of talked about this idea for Thomas for a few points up until this, but obviously a lot of credit to Jasper here to then counter notice that even though he didn't need a red card, that he needed that red card.
Yes, and I think it shows very much. Well, it doesn't help him for his snaky perception. I do think it is just it's a good play. Like, it's sort of one of your only plays where if you think that's going to happen, you might as well try and take it out of their hands, because he's already sort of behind at that point where I believe at that point they might be tied in score, but he has reason to suspect that she has another 8 already lined up.
Right.
So I think he's looking to just weaken her in any way at that point, and he might as well take the shot. And it doesn't work out, but I certainly commend him for trying. Like, you might as well, and it was as good of a play as he could have made.
Yeah, the like, again, maybe he could sell that a little bit farther by kind of being willing to expose himself more, lay it all out on the table. Thomas, I will make sure that you win the next one. I will never pick you for a deathmatch. Anything he needs to hear. The more he says those things, the more he's going to be a wolf and a threat, and all of these reasons that he has to go.
Yeah, that's why he's in that really tough situation, and in a situation where people don't have to like do what you ask of them, where it wasn't a game where he could say what he wanted and get what he wanted. He had to rely on them. He didn't have much he had so little social capital at this point that anything he said was unlikely to work, and that's the unfortunate situation he found himself in. It's unfortunate, and it really sucks that we lost him from like a cool TV character perspective. But at that point in the game, he was kind of drawing dead. No matter, like, I don't want to say the second they revealed it was a social deathmatch, he was done for. But his likelihood of surviving once that happened, he was drawing dead, I would say 9 times out of 10.
And here's what I'll say about Jasper's performance, because I've given him a lot of credit. I thought that he was really cool in a lot of aspects. I think he may have played the main match worse than anybody else, and he might have totally misevaluated it because he thought it was a game about lying. And as we've talked about, it really wasn't. It was a game with actually very, very little hidden information. And that was a huge miscalculation for him. He thought they were playing a lying game. They weren't. It was kind of like a psych game at some points, which is kind of like a lying game. There's a little bit of logic puzzling to it. But really, this wasn't a game where you were even incentivized to lie, which most games in the Genius will be, which is why it's sad to see him go.
Yeah.
But the fact that he didn't recognize that this wasn't a game that you should lie in probably means it was time for him to go. In terms of his inability to really understand the game and be a genius in the way that this game was trying to test.
Yeah, I think that his elimination ultimately is very fair. Like, as you said, he played the main match about as poorly as possibly. Add on top of all of his lying, I actually think that him, even jokingly calling out the Chameleon right away, was a terrible play in terms of like not making other people go, "Oh, this guy is good."
Yeah, yeah.
So like I think he makes a lot of missteps.
Yeah.
And I do think that ultimately his elimination from this episode makes a lot of sense and is as sad as it is to see him go, it is a satisfactory ending.
I do have to say, I really wanted them to cue in the Extreme Ways music or whatever music is going to play to showcase these epic moments. And I know we've seen this game before, but when Jasper revealed his 6 upside down as a 9, I really thought he had figured something out. And a huge part of the genius is trying to figure out hidden rules and try to figure out there's episodes where they have to reach into a bag and grab marbles, and one of the characters figures out that the marbles weigh different amounts, and I'm kind of, I'm simplifying here a little bit. The marbles weigh different amounts, and that's how you can distinguish them. There's a lot of like really subtle things that the rules of the game actually don't reveal. And I really thought that he had found one, and I was so excited for him. I really wish that he was allowed to play his 6s as 9s. If he had done that, he would have won, but...
And I think if the show, I think the one of the problems is that production was taking these games from what they were in the Korean show, and in the Korean show that never came up, that never happened. And I think because of that, they designed the cards, and if you see, all of the cards have the word, like the written out word for the number, and I think that makes it impossible to play that 6 as a 9.
I still don't see it. I think if he had sold it, they would have given it to him. And I almost think, now I'm going full conspiracy, the reason that the game was replayed in the finals of Season 2 was because they wanted somebody to play one of the 6s upside down. I know it's total fabrication, but I want it to be true.
It is great though, and that's why I'm saying though, I wish that they didn't have those words there, because I think if they didn't, then he might have played it as a 9 and not switched it around and just kept it and been like, wonder what happens when he like accidentally did it. But because there was the words there, I think he switched it around, because the obvious assumption is that the words have to read the right way.
I don't think he did it as an accident though. Just to clarify, I think that he did it jokingly, but intentionally. Because
you know what?
Because he flips it around and he says, haha, just kidding, or something to that effect.
Yeah. No, you know what? That's a fair point, because it's not a super easy thing. I mean, it's fully possible, but like it's also very easy to like put it the right way up to be flipped over. He did it twice before. So you make a good point that he probably was feeling it out, and he probably flipped it over. And you know what? I wouldn't even put it past that he was probably told to turn it around. And that was his joking, haha, whoops, sorry, which is unfortunate, because I do think it would have been, as much as I've been talking about how Jasper had to leave for a satisfying ending, I think that actually would have been a satisfying ending. Because either Jasper has to leave to fulfill this overall storyline, or he has to do something so snaky and like intelligent and manipulative that it still fulfills the storyline, ultimately at the cost of Nelk not really getting much screen time. Yeah. But it would have been great. It would have been
awesome. It was still great. I think that we still both enjoyed ourselves. I think we were a little bit negative only because, and I might have said this at the top too, but we love this game. We've both played these games ourselves. We love this show, and we want everybody else to love it and experience all of the joys and stuff. And hopefully you guys have also had fun listening. We've almost been talking for, we'll probably stretch this out to a full 3 hours at this point. I had no clue how long exactly we were going to talk for, but that's 4 times the runtime of the episode at this point, so we're still enjoying ourselves. Don't worry. That just would have been an awesome way to finish it out there. But Nelk winds up winning. Interestingly, she brings up that she doesn't forget that Thomas was the one that put her in the death match. So again, maybe Thomas was a little bit more incentivized than he realized to actually get Nelk out of there. You've already taken the first shot and missed, or taken the first shot and didn't kill. You kind of got to finish the job a little bit. But so I think that with that wrapping up of the episode, one of the things that the episode of The Genius asks at the very end to the players is, what do you think your odds of success are? So we haven't really thought about exactly how the format of this is going to go, but I thought it would be fun for us to draft the remaining 9 players in the episode, and that way we have some skin in the game, and we can figure out who's going to root for who. And also kind of just, I think it also sums up nicely what our thoughts are of each of these 9 players remaining.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea.
Cool. Okay, so I think we should do a snake draft in honor of Eat or Be Eaten. Do you have a preference for going first or second? We'll do one person will get 1 pick, then the other person will get 2, then 2, then 2, then 2, then 1. We're each going to draft 4 of the players, right? So,
and that would leave 1 left over.
Yeah.
That can be the audience's player.
Sure. Yeah, you guys will have somebody to root for too. I'm sure we'll give you a real winner in 9th pick. I already have an idea for who my 9th pick person would be, like my last place person, but I'll write that down here just so I can reveal that later. But do you have a preference on getting first pick or getting picks 2 and 3?
I don't have that much of a preference, but I can take the first pick because I know what my first pick is going to be. I'm still a little iffy on like a couple of the players who I have floating around in like 3rd, 4th, 5th, like 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th. So this way I have an easy choice.
I also know who my first place pick is. So maybe we should just randomize it here. Let's
Sure. Sounds good to me.
Let's pick a coin. I'm going to flip an imaginary coin.
Yep.
We'll throw a little bit of a psych game in here for ourselves, or we can do rock, paper, scissors. But I'm just going to flip an imaginary coin. You've got to trust me. Say heads or tails.
Tails.
It was tails. So you can have first pick.
I have first pick. All right. Well, I wonder if we have the same one, but with my first pick, I'm going to pick one of the stars of the episode.
Yep.
One of the winners. We even named this draft after him. It's Thomas.
Yep, that's why it's the snake draft. I figured that would be the first one. I'm just going to write your name in there.
Thomas.
And
Thomas
that's wrong.
he has some really he didn't do too much actively this round outside of like picking the loser and then deciding the death match. But I think he has some really good instincts. Some of which being that even though he doesn't have to, he does spend quite a bit of time in the episode. We see him figuring out other players' roles, and I think that that's a very good instinct to have. And on top of that, I think
character energy for sure from Thomas.
Yeah, and I think that his willingness to be a kingmaker is not a bad thing because it can, at the very least, help him earn goodwill. Mm-hmm. And even though Nelk does mention, like, I didn't forget what Thomas did. Mm-hmm. I think that in future instances, if he's able to put himself in that position again, he will be able to better leverage it to earn long-term allies.
Mm-hmm. For sure. Well, I definitely agree with a lot of the things about Thomas. Like I said, yeah, good point that we named the draft after him as well. That's very funny. I feel pretty strongly about my number 2 pick, and I think you'll probably agree with my number 2 as well, that I'm going to go for Anamaya, the chess streamer. That was
my number 2.
She just, I mean, maybe it's just bias. It's just viewing her as a chess player. I think that she's going to have good memory skills. Seems like she might have good social skills as well. And obviously we know that she's a little bit active online as well, which don't want to read too much into that, but definitely excited to see what she can do. Do you have anything to say about Anna Maya before I move on to my third place pick?
I completely agree. My one hesitation with picking her first was that we just didn't see all that much of her in the episode, but I think she has some good instincts, and I think that we see her. She at least gets to explain herself a bit in the death match, and I think that she is one of those players where I feel like she'll do she just has that it thing that just screams she's going to do well. I don't think she's going to be really looked at as a threat, but I think that she's very smart, and I think that's going to help her a lot.
Yeah. And similar, I actually really liked a lot of the words that you've had to say about my third pick, my second pick, the third pick of the draft. This isn't just me stealing her from you, but I'm going to go with another bird. I'm going to go with the Egyptian plover, Fareed, the criminal defense lawyer. I think that being a criminal defense lawyer, pretty good background for a lot of the things, meticulous in details, being around criminals, and also just definitely somebody that I can root for. I think that, again, we haven't seen too much from her, but she seems sharp, at least just based off of her looking sharp, coming in a blazer, gonna go for Fareed for pick number 3.
Yeah, I've made my thoughts pretty clear. I think that she is going to do very well at positioning herself. My one concern was that I did not super like how she played the main match by just not really interacting with many people and keeping completely to herself.
It's very true. But didn't build those bonds.
Yeah, but I think that if she gets out there a little bit in the next round, in the next main match, and starts to form some connections, I definitely think she is a player who will go deep. Absolutely.
Yeah, the listeners or watchers on YouTube here can't see your video because you were having some video problems. But when I picked her, there was a reaction. I think maybe you can agree for that she was maybe going to be your next pick there.
No, but we've had pretty much the same top 3 at this point, which I feel a little bad for the other players because I don't want to say I don't like them. Yeah. But yeah, we've had the same. There's
some cool ones still on the table. I think. Who are you looking at next?
My fourth pick is another one who, as I mentioned, my second, third, fourth, fifth were all sort of floating around. Yeah. So I'm still super happy to get my fourth pick, which is Roxanne.
Okay.
We've talked about how we feel that in the future she is going to potentially have a downfall. She's going to become too big of a presence for other people to ignore. And I agree with that, but I think that she has some really good instincts. I think that her being a leader, as opposed to in some games like Survivor, where it's really easy to take out the leaders, I think that could actually help her because her being a threat might scare people as if I throw her into the death match, her friends, her allies are gonna not like me so much. And I think that can really help her.
Yeah.
And on top of that, I just really like her. I really loved her presence in this episode, her willingness to play big and play hard. And she's definitely someone I want to root for. And as I said, I think that there's definitely a way where people wait too long to take the shot at her. And all of a sudden she's doing good things and in the finale.
We'll see how she's able to improve or show herself in some of the more strategic and tactical games in terms of how she might have to either do in the finale or survive any potential death matches. One thing that I did want to touch on, because I feel like there's a chance we haven't said it at all this episode, that Thomas the Snake is a thriller/horror author. I feel like we maybe didn't bring that up, and I do think that, again, great first pick, his creativity and all of that, and just that's a very intellectual profession as well. That definitely I think gives him some props.
Creativity, creativity cannot be underestimated in the Genius.
Yeah.
Like particularly in the Genius, it can't be underestimated. And yeah, the one thing keeping me from being like, it's such a great asset to him is that there's actually quite a few seemingly creative people because we have
Yeah.
quite a few entertainers.
Yep.
And a lot of entertainment is about creativity. But
Pick
speaking
number
speaking
3
of
for you.
entertainers,
Okay.
yeah, speaking of entertainers, I'm going for the entertainment of the episode, I would probably say, and that would be Rick.
Cool. Yeah, Rick is
Rick,
seemingly like an underdog, but has some definite potential, as we've talked about.
Rick, one, he's super entertaining. And two, as we sort of talked about, he has some misplays, he has some bad reads, but we've also sang his praises because he has some very good instincts, like as well, and his ability to think things over. And while he may not get it immediately, he will get things, like he will get them at a certain point. And I think that also can't be understated, especially with a lot of people who, even by the end of the game, didn't necessarily seem to fully grasp the way the main match worked. He felt like one of the people who most understood how it all functioned by the end, even if it was at the cost of him ultimately losing.
Yeah.
And I think that he didn't really make any enemies. I think he might have made a couple of friends. Like even the people who he ate, I don't think are like super upset with him. Even though like Fareed in particular has reason to, she doesn't strike me as someone who will hold a grudge.
Yeah.
So I think he's not going to be too bad. I think he's going to be all right.
And a huge part of, I think, his potential success is the fact that he kind of was just able to pass off his moves and attacks and blunders, which they were, as just kind of goofs, and in a way that allows us to keep underestimating him. And being underestimated is everything in the Genius is has like a trade-off with it, because if you're underestimated, that also might mean somebody might pick you to go into the death match against them. So that could be something that he has to watch out for in the future if he's too underestimated, but it also might allow him to win a few main matches upcoming. And
for sure,
he's also the one that understands the importance of being honest, I think, more than anybody else, which is a definite play in his favor. So I might have put my next pick above Rick. I'm close on Rick and also Fabian, who was the otter and our other winner of the episode. That's going to be my next pick, though. And I think that while he took a passive role, I'll say this. We're mentioning some about their careers and stuff. As a lover of comedy, I'm also a writer, also kind of a YouTuber and other things as well, professionally. But as a lover of comedy, and it's hard to mention comedians in the Genius without mentioning Dongmin from the Korean seasons, of course. But I agree that comedians are underestimated as intellectuals and thinkers and the modern day philosophers. And I think that while I don't know anything of his work, I think that he was able to win this match somewhat based, it was purely social that he was able to outlast the other three in his trio. However you cut that. Maybe there was some luck in terms of the peaking and other things that happened, but I think that his attitude and he does have some wits as well that brought him here. I think it looks good to be a comedian. That's what I'm getting at. So
I agree. Him and Rick were definitely very close for me. I felt they both excelled in certain ways, and like they're similar. I would say that Fabian definitely strikes me as the stronger social player. I think that he's going to have very good connections, and I think that he's not going to have to worry too much about being actively targeted by other players. My one concern is just that with Fabian, we have not seen really any strategy.
Yeah.
We haven't seen any really solid strategies, which worries me just a little bit.
We saw that he didn't like being the otter.
Yeah, yeah. If he had shown a good understanding of strategy, then I think he absolutely would have placed ahead of Rick for me. But
Yeah.
I don't think he's a terrible pick, especially like, I mean, sixth overall, he's easily someone who could win this
Yeah.
despite being that low.
It would have been interesting if we had like paused the episode a little bit in how high Jasper would have gone, because I think that Jasper definitely looked sharp and looked to be among the top of the pack there. Like not reading the edit and things like that aside from that. But I'm curious now, so I know who my next pick is. I'm ready to lock it in. Do you know who I'm going for next here? Is that too awkward of a spot to put you in?
Yeah, I don't know exactly, but I can take a guess.
Okay, yeah, go for it.
Yeah, because if I trust that you're locked in, and this is who I would probably pick. So I think you're going to go with Nelka.
Yeah, that's right. And you just got totally played because I had no clue who to pick, and now I'm just messing with you. Yeah, I think that Nelk. We didn't get too much from her because she died very quickly. I do think that what we got in the death match was strong. She's also an artist, also a creative type. So I like that. Interestingly, when she was introduced in the show, I'm not sure that she was introduced as an artist. She was introduced as an expert of the game Werewolf, which is a social deduction game, but it means that she's very familiar with different things like this, while also being a creative, and that makes me think good things, and I'm excited to see what she can do in future episodes for sure.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think this bottom three, unfortunately, is only really here because we didn't get to see a ton of them from like a gameplay perspective and what their thoughts are, how they would do. We didn't get to see too much. And like Nelk has the deathmatch to point to, which is why I definitely would have like put her above the other two, because one of them, the one thing we did get to see was not good, and then the other one we just didn't get to see much at all.
We do know the professions of the others. Your options are going to be between Nuchka, the boxer, and Nazar, the actor. And I wouldn't say that we didn't see too much of Nazar. I felt like we got to see a decent amount of him. And the question is Nazar either going to be this person that really gets to rise to their own occasion and fulfill something big, or is he actually going to be the goof? And I think that both of us kind of have Rick recognized as that character that's really going to come into his own and really start to turn some things around. I wrote down Nazar as the person that was going to go undrafted, but I'm curious which of these two remaining you're taking.
No, you're absolutely correct. I feel bad to do it, but no, I'm taking Nuchka. I feel like we didn't get to see too much of her. The one sort of strategy thing we did get to briefly see was her talking about the group that was formed, about the three like coming together. And I think that she has a potential there. And I definitely think that she isn't being looked at as like a threat in any way, which we discussed is a double-edged sword. The main thing is just, unfortunately, and I hate to say it, but Nazar, I don't have the most hope for. He didn't have a good showing this first episode. He was kind of like really edited as a goofball, and this is a little bit of a behind-the-scenes thing that I don't know if you knew, but sort of really made me hesitant to pick him, is that one of these contestants was 4 hours late to start filming, and it was Nazar. And so I don't think that's a good first impression to make, and I think that could really cost him.
He's the diva. He's the diva among them. The actor. I mean, maybe we don't know any of these people. He might be worth a lot more than the rest of them, and maybe he had something else that he had to do. That's not like a personal slight to say that he had to show up late. I'm kind of joking that he was a diva, but
and as we saw, that didn't cost him. He wasn't the one picked for the deathmatch, so it didn't cost him this episode. So it might be completely unconsequential.
But I could certainly see the players like, so when you are in the position of Thomas and Fabian and you have to pick somebody, you actually aren't super... Nelk jokes, say you're picking me because I'm a threat, but she's right in that, like, they are incentivized somewhat to at least pick a threat to hope that a threat could go home. You don't know who that person's going to pick, but if you don't really see Nazar as a threat, which we aren't really either, then maybe that's another reason to not pick him.
Yeah.
And I think that also kind of brings up an interesting point, which I think we can talk about now to kind of round out the episode, is that this series is going to be 8 episodes long, which means that we are going to see 8 eliminations and a winner.
Yeah.
I don't want to theorize too much, and please, if you could possibly know anything, don't say anything like that anywhere. But I think that we could potentially see a quit at some point, which in my mind would make the most sense in terms of how we get this whole thing to last 8 episodes. There's a few different ways that we could do it, but I do think we could potentially have one of these players walk away from the Genius.
I actually hadn't even thought about that. Like, I had also clocked the 8 episodes, but my assumption was that I felt like they might try and do a finale with 3 people.
Yeah, that's really the other play, right?
Yeah, like that was my assumption, and unless they have a round thrown somewhere in there where they decide to do a double elimination.
Double elimination is the third option.
Yeah, those are really the only 3 ways. And I actually hadn't even registered that there could be like a quit, but that's possible. I would hope not. Of course, we want these players to play to the best of their ability and get to show as much as possible. And for someone to quit, it would be incredibly unfortunate.
Yeah.
But yeah, I am definitely interested to see how those 8 episodes play out, because it is interesting.
Yeah, for sure. It's one other thing I think that we didn't talk about too much. I guess we did talk a little bit about the Garnets. We'll see how those are the, what did you call them, G-Coins?
G-Coins. I can't remember exactly where, but I believe I remember reading that's what they were being called to, referred to.
Yeah.
That might have come from Animaja, but I wouldn't stake anything on it.
Fair enough. Yeah, but I'm definitely excited. I think that we kind of came to a similar conclusion talking for a few hours here on the different players. Kind of funny to have them all rank out the same. Anything else, I guess, worth talking about in terms of this? Oh, I guess, to explore. So, could potentially be a quit. If it happens, it happens. Maybe we have never seen a double elimination in any capacity in the Genius, I don't believe, right?
No. The Korean show has always been the same number of episodes, same number of contestants.
Though it's certainly possible because we have seen death matches that are played 2-on-2. And we've seen other elimination game formats like the Challenge, where multiple players are eliminated in groups after playing the games as groups. So that's definitely a possibility that we could see. I don't know when in the season that would happen. It would probably be Final 8 or Final 6. Final 8 seems a little soon. Final 6 also just seems, I don't know. It doesn't, I don't want that to happen either way.
It'd have to happen somewhere in the middle, for sure, because anything after 6 and it's way too late, that's way too few players. Anything before 8 and it's like a little too early to throw such a strange twist on. I think what I'm most hoping for might just be a final 3 in the finale.
And I think that's very, very possible. I think that there's a lot of different games that when you look at the traditional finals format of the Genius, which is typically played as a best 2 out of 3 for games that would otherwise be death matches. And that kind of removes a huge Genius aspect of the games, which is playing multiplayer games, playing the political game, playing against a variety of other opponents, that I actually think 3-player games are a little bit more engaging. It's not just watching people play chess or whatever it is, it's a social, political game. And for that aspect, having a final 3 where one winner is chosen, the other 2 players both lose, no deathmatch, the final 3 just is a deathmatch itself, I think could actually be a really cool way to change up the format a little bit.
Yeah, I agree. And if they were to cut out any round, I'm actually really not mad at the final 3 because that round is usually the most boring.
Yeah.
Because it is just like sort of 3 players playing a game that, because it's not formatted in a way of like playing it for an overall win sort of thing. There's still the death match. It
Right.
sometimes is affected in very different like ways of playing as well that can sometimes turn out a little dull.
Yeah.
Like usually it's the round that like isn't the most exciting. So to just
Yeah.
turn into a finale to give it that excitement isn't the worst thing. As long as they have a good game, I'm gonna be happy.
Yeah, for sure. There's definitely some weird parts of that final 3 game where basically it's like 2 games are played and you just have to not lose both of them. Rather than try to win either of them, which eventually you do have to win one of them, but it more feels like you just can't lose both of them, and there's kind of like a loser's bracket feel to it or something. It can take some of the steam out, as opposed to just having a really epic final game that has a lot of pieces into it. Like maybe we could see some type of like betting game with mini games, but the players themselves also play the mini games or something like that. I think could be a really fun way to finish out a season.
Yeah, there's a lot of ways they could finish it, and I mean, like pretty much the whole season, I'm super interested to see how they handle everything, and I'm really excited to see where we go from here.
For sure. And if you guys are excited to continue along and see where we go from here, make sure to subscribe for future episodes. This was a long one. Thanks for sticking with us. And if you did, I'm sure you'll probably say, thank you to us for doing it. Because, this was, we put a lot of words out there. And let us know what you think, what you are thinking of the Netherlands Genius. Don't leave spoilers for future episodes in the comments. Depends on when this comes out, but people might have seen the next one. Please only talk about this episode. Probably should have said that earlier on. But just to keep the comments a safe place for people that have seen this episode specifically and none further. But let us know what you think about the different players, what you think about the format of the show, and what you thought about the podcast and the job that we did here. Huge thanks to Gemini for all of your time and allowing us to pick your brain and hear your thoughts and grab all of this insight from you. Hopefully we can do it all again for the next one. That'll be depending on both of our schedules and stuff, but this was fun. It was fun to get to talk to somebody else that is so passionate about something that I love so much as well. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for allowing me to come here and just give my thoughts. I had so many about them, and I know you did too, and it was really nice to have the discussion we did. I mean, we talked for a long time. We had no shortage of things to talk about.
The sun was up when we started talking, and now it is no longer, as we are both in darkness here. But that is going to be it for us today. Thank you guys very much for watching. I'm NoLucksGiven here with Gemini. Peace.